Yeah, this morning was a mess. Apparently my phone, I didn't wake up to my phone last night. There was a major issue that happened at one of my sites uh, last night, and nobody could get a hold of me. I had like 17 missed calls this
Oh,
morning.
jeez.
I woke up at like, I don't know, 5:36, and I'm like, look at my phone, and it's just blowing up. Like
Holy cow.
both my work phone and my personal phone. I'm like, shit, what's
Yeah.
going on? So
So, what do you mean by sites?
So I'm an operations manager for a security company.
Okay.
So I manage about 22 different locations and all the officers there. Um, uh, and um, so yeah, we just call it a site. So like
Okay.
we guard you know uh, various different locations, and um, yeah, each location is a site. Um,
Okay.
but um,
Hey, I started recording. Is it all right that you're talking about this stuff, or do you want me to cut it out?
yeah, I don't think I've said anything
Okay. All right.
important that I can't say, out in
Okay.
public.
All right. I just wanted to make sure you knew I was recording. Normally, I just wanted to let you, you know, talk. I didn't mean to do it without you being aware or anything.
No, no, you're fine. Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, I since I've lived in Tennessee, I work for a security company, and yeah, I've moved up. I started off as an officer, and I've moved up the ranks to now I'm an operations manager. Um, um, but but yeah, it's a cool job. I like it. It's a lot of work, but being on duty, or on call, so to speak, all the time. But um, it between that and my reptile business, it keeps me plenty busy. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Isn't it funny how we have this self-induced extremely busy life?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's wild. I've it didn't matter what job I've had over the years. You know, I've always been busy. I married fairly young. Me and my wife have been together this year 18 years.
Wow. How
And
old are you?
36.
Okay.
Um, and we had kids young. My daughter is about to turn 17. Um,
That is wild, dude.
yeah. Um, yeah, I have a 17-year-old or almost 17-year-old here in a couple weeks, and then a 13-year-old. Um, yeah, my life's been kind of crazy for a really long time. I got into reptiles when I was about 16. I started breeding in 2007. Um, just like a litter here, clutch there, kind of thing. But it's slowly grown. Every year I produce more and more. Um, I think I'm still somewhere in the realm of like 200 babies a year, give or take.
Wow.
Um, this year actually was pathetically small. Um, I don't even know. I don't even know. This year may be just a total drop in the bucket and be terrible. So far, the only thing that's hatched is some albino Darwin carpets.
Well, you're not the first person to say that. I'm sure you're aware.
Oh yeah, it's last year wasn't great either. I have a feeling being so busy. I think that played a role in just maybe my timing was off. Um, the other thing I think about is if potentially the not only timing, but just the animals are still, I think, trying to adjust to this location. I lived in California for most of my life. We moved out to Tennessee 3 years ago, and the animals did really well. My first year out here, we blew it out the park and had a huge year. And the last 2 years haven't been good. So I don't know if once they finally got through a full, cycle here, that they're thrown off because of, the time change of the temperature changes differently here. My room was, took longer to dial in because of the season changes. It's different here. In California, it was, hot all the time. I mean, except when it wasn't. And here we get a lot more rainstorms. We get temperature changes differently. We were able, like colubrids, for instance, we breed a lot of like bull snakes and corn snakes and stuff. And I was able to throw them in the garage and then pull them out on like clockwork. And they would just immediately start to breed after I got a couple meals in them. And the time of year that happens here in Tennessee, I bring them in and then it's still cold and rainy for a couple weeks. And they just don't seem to get that same click that I got in California when I would bring them in back into the reptile room. So
what was that move like? I mean, you said it was 3 years ago, right? Was that? I mean, that's a huge haul going from California to.
It was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I had a Toyota 4Runner at the time, and I packed every single snake. Anybody that fit in like deli cups, they went in deli cups. Anybody that was bigger than that had to go in a snake bag. I had to go buy more snake bags and have extras because, if anybody's put a snake in a snake bag, that half of them, poop or pee in the first 10 seconds. And so I had them all packed in snake bags or deli cups, and then they were separated into big, long tote, plastic totes with air holes punched in. And that way I could stack them in the back of my 4Runner. I had them stacked all the way to the ceiling, both sides, with the seats laid down. And I had bungee cords and tie downs, X'd across the back of my truck. And then I had my dogs in between them the snakes and me. And then my son was in the passenger seat, and then my daughter had to ride with my best buddy who was driving the U-Haul. But it was 3 days of driving. We drove from California to Flagstaff, Arizona, stayed the night in the hotel. At the time, it was November. No, it was October. It was right before Halloween. So it was cold. In Flagstaff, we had to carry all the snake totes into the hotel room at like 3 in the morning. It was like -2, I think. It was some crazy cold. We're in t-shirts and shorts because we just came from California and we were loading up U-Hauls, we loaded up into the hotel, loaded back out early in the morning, got back on the road. We drove until we hit Oklahoma City. Stayed the night in Oklahoma City again, super late at night, loaded everything into the hotel and then back. And then by the third night, we were moved in back into our house in Tennessee. So
Wow.
Um, it was rough, but we didn't kill anything. So that was probably the most impressive thing. I've heard millions of horror stories of people traveling that far, and the animal at the bottom gets drowned by pee from the snake above it or something
Mm.
like crazy like that. Or but we didn't lose anybody. Pretty proud of that. Um, the big key was of each other, and um, and I was really attentive because we would have to move them all into the hotel. We would go through and make sure that nobody had pooped or peed, and if we did, we were changing out snake bags and using paper towels to clean up any loose moisture and stuff inside the
Wow.
tubs. But yeah, it was rough. Um, and then when we got here, I'm building cages. I mean, most of my stuff is racks. And so I was building. I had so much stuff in the U-Haul, I had to literally disassemble most of my racks to get it all to fit. And so I was building racks my first, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. I was so I could actually put the animals away somewhere. And then, full blown, all new setups, all of that. It was rough. I will not do that again. I can assure you that.
Wow. Yeah, maybe once you get out of the hobby.
Yeah, I'm gonna die in this hobby. There's no getting rid of me.
Then you're gonna die in Tennessee.
Yep, yep.
So yeah, I mean, so just quick background. I had hit you up because you produced the one of the Argentine boas that I have, which was kind of cool that, I was able to get an animal that was getting rehomed, and then he had some information, and I guess it was a joint pairing between you and Brian,
Right.
that she came from. And are you still working with them? Or are you still gonna continue breeding them?
Yeah. I still have Argentines. That's one that I'll never get rid of. Uh, I'm actually in the process of building a whole nother room for them and Brettles pythons.
Hmm.
Um, and probably a couple other things will fall into that category to that room. But they they require a much lower cool down period than a lot of my other species, and so I haven't routinely produced them. I've produced them a bunch of times now, but uh, I want to say it's been a little bit more luck than science, and so I'd like to make it science. We want to make a room that I can drop those temperatures and it's not going to affect have any ill effects on any animals from carpet pythons and other species. And so that's something we're striving for. Just need the funds and the time to do it. But yeah, we have I have a group of adult Argentines, and I even have some that I'm raising up. So I'm gonna keep trying. We haven't produced any since the I want to say 20 would have been 2019 or 2020. I think was the last time I produced them successfully.
Oh, okay. So that might be my girl then.
Yeah, it might be. It's been a while, unfortunately. It's just it does. I don't get it cold enough for them, and so they're still looking for food and still not really interested in each other. But
So they're kind of, I mean, that's Argentina, right? I mean, their winters can be pretty chilly. So
yeah,
now
they're a
what
weird. They're essentially a diamond python in a boa skin. They're
interesting.
the southernmost found boa constrictor in the entire world, and so that's why they're black. It's really cold there during, at least in comparison to a lot of the other boa species,
Hmm.
and so yeah, they can get really, really cold temperatures at night. And it's similar to Brettles pythons. The Brettles pythons are, in the deserts, and they have the same effects. There's nothing to hold on to that heat. And so during the winter, it's really cold. And the same goes for Argentines. They're in a desert. People think of boa constrictors and they immediately think of this jungle habitat. And that's not really where they're from. Argentina is a mixed bag of, dry forest and deserts. There's cactus. I mean,
Wow.
And it'll get really cold at night, at least in comparison to, boa standards. And they kind of need that for, reproduction. At least in my experience. I'm sure there's other people that have been successful with them, keeping them differently. But in my experience, every time I've tried to just keep them like everybody else, I get a mixed bag of production. So and
So
even when I have been successful, I get a higher amount of slugs than I would, from other boas. So I definitely think it's because I'm not getting them cold enough.
what do you keep your standard temperatures at when you're not doing the temperature cycle for breeding for them?
I've got a 90-degree hot spot, and then about 80 ambient. The room fluctuates a little bit, obviously, with the seasons, but um, yeah, it's 80. That's where I have my thermostats. Is it's 90 from during the day for 12 hours, and then the thermostat turns down to 80 at night, and then whatever the ambient is, which is typically about 80.
Okay. So pretty standard temperatures otherwise.
Yeah, and they could take it probably pretty hot. I mean, um, but it's when comes winter time, they don't do well. In fact, I've had snakes get respiratory infection, and the only thing I can think of is because they'll get snotty and stuff, and the only thing I can think of is it's because they're not getting cold. It's getting just cold enough for their immune system to be deficient, but not cold enough to really kick them down into that oh, okay, it's time to breed. Oops, sorry, I'm making my thing shake. But
Interesting. So how many Argentines do you have?
uh
Oh damn, it's got to be a lot.
7. I
Okay.
think I think I have 7, somewhere in that ballpark.
All right, right on. They take up a lot of space, right? Like what size cage are you keeping yours in?
I either do the 4-foot vision cages, or some of the smaller ones will be in like the boa tubs, the big vision boa tubs, or V180 or something like that.
Okay.
They're fairly amendable to those enclosures. They're big, but they're more stout than they are long. I mean, I think my biggest girl is maybe 8 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if I mean, in a magical world where I wasn't an actual breeder, I'd probably keep them in some sort of big, 8-foot enclosure. But
Mm-hmm.
For breeding purposes, they seem to be amendable to a little bit smaller of an enclosure. But that kind of goes for a lot of the species I work with. I mean, if I wasn't breeding things on a regular basis, yeah, I mean, everybody would have some big display zoological type, enclosure. But for breeding purposes and needing to keep things sanitary, it's too difficult to have that on a huge scale. Not unless I have a bunch of employees.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I mean, between my regular full time 60+ hour a week job and my daughter and my kids, come help clean cages and stuff all the time, and it's still a lot to keep up with.
How many animals do you have right now?
Um, Probably have somewhere in the 300 range, and then during the peak of hatching season, I'm probably somewhere in the realm of 500, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and with every intention of growing past that. I mean, the goal in a perfect world would be to, drop my regular day job and just do this. So, and I'm not that far away from being able to do that, but just
That's
have to
awesome.
make enough, produce enough animals to do it.
Have you had any issues with pushing with your Argentines?
With what?
Pushing?
Like pushing cages open, or
Yeah, like trying to get out. Kind
I've
of.
had I've had an Argentine escape once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the only. Um, this was when I first got started. I had it's like a 7.5 foot male, um, open it's a 4 or 6 foot vision cage. He somehow got the glass to just slide open, and I didn't have locks on him at the time, and so he just slid the door open, and um, I tore my apartment up, um, and looked everywhere, and then the door was actually open. The sliding glass door was cracked to allow the dog to go in and out of the backyard. So I was tearing up the backyard. I was looking. I lived in an apartment, so there was like a creek down below my apartment. I was trudging through the creek, looking in the bushes. I had all my friends there trying to help. We looked for 7 hours for that snake,
Wow.
and right as we were about to give up, one of my friends who was not into snakes, was headed into the kitchen for a glass of water, and he let out the biggest little girl scream, and I was like, "Yes, we found it!" He had climbed out of the enclosure, up the curtain rod, or up to the curtain rod, and then the kitchen was vaulted, so we had the upper cabinets had essentially created a shelf,
Hmm.
and he was sitting up there, above the pantry, and he'd apparently been sitting there for the entire time. But it wasn't until he started to come down and was hanging eye level with my buddy when he came around the corner. He was face to face with a 7 foot Argentine boa, and
Wow.
it immediately just started hissing at him, and he was like, "Wah!" It was fantastic.
Yeah, their hiss can be pretty intimidating for sure.
Yeah, they have a much raspier, guttural hiss.
Yeah.
Um, I always think of like it. It sounds like Darth Vader talking. Um, I don't know what it is about them, but their hiss is way, way more intimidating than any other boa constrictor I've ever worked with. I mean, but yeah, other than that, I never really get them pushing out of their enclosures. Even younger ones, when they're in racks and stuff, I don't get that. I do get a lot of activity. They do tend to move around, more than some of the other boas. Some of my other stuff are very sedentary, and they'll just kind of sit in a corner and not do a lot. And I typically will open, even the ones in tubs, I'll typically open with a hook because sometimes they're right there. I mean, and then they just come launching out looking for food. Um, so yeah, they're more active. I mean, they're pushing around, they're testing the waters, they're trying to escape. I mean,
Yeah, my girl, it's weird. If I'm in the room, and she hasn't been fed and it's been like over 5 or 7 days since she ate, then she cruises a lot, and I can tell because her substrate's all tore up, and
right.
she'll knock plants over and everything. And then if I'm in the room, she'll go over to the corners of the glass and start pushing.
Pushing.
And she loves being out. I mean, if I open that door up, she'll come out and come right up to me. And, you know, it's easy to just put her on my shoulders and walk around the house. And
But
she just seems to get a kick out of that. Just likes being out, does not like being in the cage. And even despite being in a 6x2 now, and
yeah,
she still isn't too keen on it.
they're very curious snakes. I mean, in my experience, you open the cage and they're going to come out and explore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're, I mean, I've been keeping Argentines now. Well, I don't even know. I got Argentines fairly quickly. As soon as I heard about them, I got some, and I guess I've been into them now. I don't know, some 15 years or something like that. I mean, they're incredible snakes, and each one of them has kind of their own little unique personality. I had some that really didn't like to be touched. You know, they would, you know, if you were holding them, they didn't want to wrap onto anything or hold on. They just, you know, they'd kind of throw their body around and try and not desperate to get away, but just didn't like the feeling of, you know, being held or touched. But then I've had some that were super mellow and super, you know, just wanted to hang out all day and, you know, be buddies. I've had ones that, I had one that was hysterical that I would feed her and then she'd start to hiss at me if I happened to be moving around in the room, like I was going to take it from her. And it's like, I gave you the damn rat. I mean, and that's the only time she would hiss at you. I mean, but yeah, they're
she gets
incredible snakes.
They really are. They have a lot of personality. They're not your standard boa. They're very active, very inquisitive. They watch, you know, things that are going on, and I kind of like the spunkiness that if you sneak up on them, they're gonna let you know that they don't appreciate it. You know, that they like,
Yeah.
you know, they'll verbally let you know. And yeah, she's such a cool animal. I'm so happy to have her. I want to get a male now, and
Yeah.
if I could, if I had the room, I'd probably do like a trio. I would love that, but I don't know. I think I'll just test the waters and try out a pair.
Yeah. They're incredible snakes. I mean, and yeah, if you're keeping them in a big enclosure like that, yeah, you definitely don't want to have, you know, a billion of them.
Yeah.
They take up a lot of space. They eat a lot of food. I mean, you know, my big girls are on, you know, small to medium rabbits on a fairly regular basis. So, you know, yeah, it's a lot. I mean, they're not a small snake. It's the only boa constrictor that I really work with that's that big. Most of my stuff, I work with a lot of the crawl Ks, the Tarahumaras, the San Isidore and Costa Rican boas, long-tail boas, you know, like a lot of the smaller stuff that really are incredibly small in comparison to, you know, when people hear boa constrictor, they immediately think of this giant, you know, snake. And, you know, the crawl Ks are, you know, successfully reproduce and they're like all of 3 feet long. I mean,
it's incredible.
You know, yeah, it's like a, you know, they're smaller than a ball python. I mean, so the Argentines though just have such a fascinating, between them being kind of having their own personality and just them being so unique and living, you know, where they do and how they do. It's, yeah, they're a favorite of mine for sure. I wish that I had been able to create some sort of, you know, specific room for them a lot longer ago, but we'll get there. I mean, but I've been very fortunate to reproduce them a fair amount of times, even if it was more of a mistakes. But Yeah, they're incredible. I mean, and yeah, like you said, they'll talk to you. I mean, I had one that I always used to scare everybody with. That if as soon as you open the enclosure, he'd start audibly, hissing as loud as he could and making a big fuss. And but I knew that every time, if you just reached in and grabbed him, he immediately would stop. It was just, he felt cornered in his enclosure, and
Yeah.
so he would just, start up. And so then I'd open the door and I'd reach in, and people were like, "You're crazy!" And then, I'd pick him up and he was fine. But um, yeah, they each kind of have their own unique personality, and yeah, I love them. I mean, I can't get enough of them. Them and another species that they remind me of is olive pythons.
Mm.
I work with olive pythons as well, and they're similar. Real, fairly active, very curious, um, coming out, checking things out, testing their waters. Um, they're I like stuff like that. I mean, carpet pythons aren't that different. They can be similar as well. I mean, I don't, I'm not looking for a pet rock. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I like the personality. I like that. And same with my girl. It's all bark, no bite. I mean,
yeah,
she'll, and it happened. The hissing probably all happened maybe within the first 2 or 3 weeks of having her. And
yeah,
ever since then, she's so used to me now, and desensitized to me going in there that she doesn't hiss anymore, which it's kind of cool. So I'm kind of sad, because it's such
yeah.
a neat
You
sound.
get, yeah, you get kind of used to, them putting up a fuss. I mean, we do the same thing with bull snakes. I breed bull snakes a lot, and as babies, they're super hissing and do the big rattlesnake stance, and
Hmm.
most of that goes away as they get older. And I have a very small handful that'll still do it, and I almost purposely don't do anything with them in hopes that that'll last as long as possible,
Hmm.
because it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a rattlesnake that you can play with. I mean, so it's but yeah, the Argentines, in all the years that I've worked with Argentines, I think I've been bit by babies a ton, obviously, while I'm sexing things and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
as far as anything past, a year old, I think I've only been bitten maybe twice in all of these years that I've been working with Argentines. I mean,
Mm.
they just, you know, they would rather put up a big fuss and tell you to go away than to actually get, physically defensive. I mean, but not to say that you can't get bit by an adult Argentine boa, but at
Yeah.
least, I mean,
It's pretty funny because I feed her in a like a separate Rubbermaid tote, because the large rats, when they're dripping wet and everything, and I use coconut husk, and it's just easier to wash the blood and poop and whatever out of the bin. And so what I do now is I actually put the bin in front of her cage, and I open it, and I open the cage, and she goes inside. So it's like, I don't know if I'm putting too much into it, but to me, she's got a level of intelligence that, like, she knows what's up, and
right,
she knows I go in here and I get my food.
right. I used to do that years ago. I had a separate container where everybody went to feed, and I tend to get I was getting bit a lot more
Mm,
because of that. When I was going in to remove the animal and put them back to their enclosure, they're still in feed mode, as opposed
yeah.
to feeding them in their cage. They can eat, and then they can go find their where they're going to rest or where they're going to and so I plus you get to enough animals, and you're like, man, this, feeding something can take, days almost.
Hmm.
You get some of these animals that will drop something and then pick it back up, and then you've got all these extra bins of trying to, feed all these animals. And even feeding in itself still takes, all night for me sometimes. And so the big thing I stopped doing when I did that was I stopped thawing the rodents in water. I started kind of air drying them, so to speak, and letting them thaw in the open air. And then as soon as they were thaw, I was offering it, as opposed to, like I said, doing it in the hot water. Takes, much shorter period of time, but you don't have to deal with, them getting bedding, stuck to the rat
Yeah.
all the time and stuff like that. That's because that's a pain. I mean, with a large collection like mine, I use particulate bedding in various cages over paper, and that them being wet, everything will stick to them like glue. I mean, and then it's a mess. I mean,
Yeah, that's part of the problem too. I mean, not only do you have the rat juice everywhere, which smells like the nastiest wet dog you've ever smelled, and
yep,
sometimes they defecated on themselves during, the process of being euthanized, and
right,
it gets so nasty sometimes. And there's certain animals that I couldn't take out of a cage and put in a bin because they wouldn't eat them. Like my Timor pythons, good luck. I mean, they're going to be
right,
so freaked out then that they're probably just not going to eat. So
right,
it's almost, I have half that eat in their cage, and then I have half that I just don't want to deal with the mess, and I want to minimize the risk of ingesting substrate and everything. But that's a
right.
good idea. I might try thawing just in the open air and not have to deal with the wet rat.
It takes a little more practice because you can time it almost by a clock, if you put it in hot water, um, and thawing it in the open air, depending on, the ambient temperature of your room, it can take a little practice. I mean, during the winter, I have to put everything in tubs and have them like sitting on my the I have like a rolly cart, like a cleaning cart, and
Hmm.
they have to all be up on that, because if I put them on the floor, it's much cooler by the floor, and it'll take almost all day to thaw anything, even the smallest of rodents. And so it takes a little bit of practice, but it's definitely saved me from having animals ingest a lot of particulate bedding. Um, and it got to a point where I couldn't have enough buckets of hot water. I mean, they, when you're feeding 500 something, animals, it you end up with a lot of buckets of hot water. I mean,
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I've only got 15 snakes, so
right.
I've got, it's easy. Feeding day is an hour for me. I'm sure for you it's multiple days.
Yeah, it's sometimes I have to. Right now I have two reptile rooms. I have a hatching room, and then I have the adult room. And um, yeah, I mean, it could take me, depending on how many babies are in the hatchling room. I mean, it could take me all night just to do that room, and then I got to thaw everything for the adults the next night. Or I tend to split it up. Um, this half of the adult room or that half of the adult room, and there's times where it takes me 3 days in a row of just going down there for a couple hours feeding everybody to get it all done. There's there's a lot of interesting things that you have to change in how you keep the more animals that you get. I mean, even something as simple as, cleaning cages. I used to go down and go in and clean cages, just kind of at will. A couple hours every day, I go in for 45 minutes, an hour, clean a couple cages that had gone to the bathroom, and move on. And now at this point, it's like I pick a day of the week, I go in, I clean half the room, and then the next day I go in and I clean the other half of the room. And if I was cleaning up every single thing that, happened that day, I mean, I'd be in the reptile room all the time, because I can't even get from start to finish on half the room before the things, some of the stuff in the beginning is going to the bathroom again. And you're like, well, I mean, of course, if I'm still working on that, rack, I'll just clean it again. But yeah, it's a lot. Um, you know, Even something as simple as like what bedding you use. Um, I used to buy the blocks of like cocoa husk at like $25 a block or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
now I've gotten to the point where, I mean, I'd go through hundreds of dollars of, cocoa block. I mean, in just one clean out. I mean, I can't. So, I mean, I use cypress mulch or cocoa husk that I buy at the local, um, you know, uh, what do you call them? I guess
Home improvement, like
either
a
a home
garden center.
improvement, yeah, a garden center or a home improvement center, and then I do my own, preventive, mite protection, and I have to do it that way. I mean, because I mean, I'd spend all my money on bedding. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
I go through um, at least $1,000 in rats a month. I mean,
Jeez. Have you
you
thought
know,
about breeding your own?
I have bred my own, and I hate rats.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't like rats when I was feeding them to snakes. I really hate rats when they're alive. I I seem to have really bad allergic reaction to their urine,
Mm,
and actually, when I used to manage so to circle back, kind of my beginning of the reptile hobby, I got interested when I was playing drums professionally for a heavy metal band, um, and I couldn't be the the wuss that wouldn't hold the snake. I was afraid of snakes growing up, which is usually a shock to people, but I couldn't be the wuss that wouldn't hold the snake, and so I held the snake, and I realized, wow, I mean, this is just a misunderstood animal. This is really cool, and I have always had a huge passion for exotic animals. I always wanted to be a zookeeper and run, a zoo doing tigers or hippos or rhinos or something. And so when I found snakes and reptiles, I was like, man, this is awesome. I really got to get into this. And then it exploded from there. Got my first snake when I was like 16. And then by the time I was, 18, I was working at a reptile shop, working at a reptile zoo, and bringing home animals as quick as my paychecks would allow. That's actually where I met Brandon Wheeler. Lots of people in the Morelia community know Brandon.
mm-hmm.
We worked at a shop together, and he would come over, and I mean, he basically lived at my house there in the beginning. So me and him are like brothers.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I got really into reptiles really fast, and at the reptile shops I would work. Um, you know, you'd excuse me. You had so much stuff. I mean, that I was exposed to, and just I fell in love with all of that stuff right away. I mean, I pretty much that's what I keep today. I mean, um, it's all the stuff I fell in love with back then. I mean,
So
but
when did you, how old were you when you were afraid of snakes? And like, because I identify with that. I remember seeing snakes when I was a kid. My uncle had snakes and being terrified of them, but extremely interested in them, and being like, oh my God, like, what if that thing bites me? It was like the
right,
fear of the unknown.
yeah, and that's the bottom line, is that you're afraid of what you don't know, and my I guess, let's see, I was 14 when I was um, playing with that band or started with that band, 14, 15, um, and got exposed to reptiles like in a, you know, in a more comforting way. I was a Boy Scout. We went to a couple nature museums when I was younger than that. And I was the kid sitting in the back of the class going, yeah, no, I don't need to touch it. Like, I don't need to hold it. No, I'm good. I'm okay. Um, so, yeah, most of my childhood, basically, I mean, into my teen years, I was afraid of reptiles. I mean, um, and yeah, it wasn't really until, you know, I'm this 14-year-old kid playing with a bunch of 25, 26-year-old, bandmates that, playing heavy metal. I couldn't be the guy that's like, oh, yeah, no, snakes are scary. I mean,
That's so funny. So it was like a almost peer pressure or this
oh, yeah.
this fear of looking like a
Yep.
wimp, pushed you towards that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 100% pure pressure. The guitarist in the band was like, he had a, 4 or 5 foot ball python, and he was like, "Oh, you want to see my snake?" And I'm like, "No, yeah, yeah, okay." Like, um, before I knew it, I was holding one, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this isn't that bad." I mean, um, and then I would just catch myself, over the course of that first kind of year or two. I kept wanting, hey, I'd be over at his house. Hey, can we hold the snake? I mean, so my curiosity just got the best of me at that point. But my wife was the same way. She was deathly afraid of snakes when we met, and on we had mutual friends, and so her first time meeting me was actually at my apartment. I moved out fairly early when I was a kid. I'd graduated early and stuff, and um, it was at my apartment. She was sitting out in front. She wouldn't come inside. She's like, "No, there's a bunch of snakes in there. I'm not coming
Oh
in."
wow.
And I somehow convinced her to come in. And she was sitting on the couch, and I don't think she was there 5 minutes before I'd pull out this like 4 foot doom rolls boa, and I was like, "Here, you should hold this." She likes people, and she's like, "Oh, okay." And and now 18 years later, she's got her own pet snakes and stuff. So
That's
um,
awesome.
just peer pressure.
Yeah, well,
not,
I mean,
not a good lesson for peer pressure, but I mean,
well, if you avoid all the things that make you uncomfortable,
right.
man, you're never going to experience very much,
Yeah.
and I mean, it was the same, like I said, it was the same thing for me. I was afraid of snakes. I remember I was afraid, I still have arachnophobia, and huntsman spiders freak me the hell out. I don't like them. If one comes to my house, it's dead. And I love animals and all that, and I'm all for good karma, but I remember I was afraid of spiders, so I found this back in the day. I think it was on Fauna Classifieds. I found this guy that had like 14 spiderlings, and it was red rumps and curly hairs,
Right.
and it was a dozen of them for, I can't remember. It was something insane, like $70 shipped or something crazy like that,
Right.
and I got them and just set up all these little cups, and then they went into cages, and yeah, my fear was gone. And I remember I left one of the cages open for like 2 weeks, and the thing was coming out every night and spun webs all over the place and would go back in. And so she had her burrow, and I was just like, you know what, let her do her thing. She was this free ranging tarantula that would come out
That's
and had
so
like a
funny.
little course and go right back in. It was so crazy.
That's super funny. I had some tarantulas when I first kind of got into the hobby, um, and my wife put a kibosh to that. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, you got to give my wife credit. She's totally cool with however many snakes that we get. Snakes, lizards, turtles. We've got all kinds of stuff. Geckos. I mean, um, but where she draws the line is the tarantulas. I had a few when we first started dating, and I I ruined it. I had her hold I think it was like a Texas Brown or a curly hair. It was something rosy. It was something like that. Very
Hmm.
calm, quiet, slow moving, and I had it crawl across her hand a couple times, and she's like, "Okay, this is okay." Like, and I got overzealous, and I pulled out one of my avicularias, the pink toe tarantula.
Oh no! I was just gonna say, it's a good thing you didn't go with a pink toe.
and I loved my pink toes. I had versicolors, and I had a couple different, Avics, and but anyway, I pulled out my biggest Avic, and I put it in her hands, and she was like, "Okay, this is cool too." And right as she said that, it took about solid 2 seconds, and it was on the top of her head,
Yeah.
and she's screaming bloody murder. Get it off me! Get it off me! And that was pretty much the end of my tarantula keeping career. I mean,
The poor pink toes, that's what they do. They're arboreal. They just want to
yeah,
go high, you know. So it was just doing what a pink toe does. Yeah,
hmm
but the way they move too, like they'll be
it's
so slow
yeah,
and seem like you know exactly what they're gonna do, and
yep,
then bam, they're
boom,
flying.
yeah. So my tarantula career got kiboshed, but I mean, I've basically not been said no to on anything I want to keep. I mean, so I can't complain too much. I mean, I've got all kinds of liasis stuff. I've got different boa constrictors, subspecies, and localities. I've got carpet pythons of every, you know, color and subspecies, and you know, um, bull snakes, corn snakes, you name it. I've got stuff. I mean, so
Well, so let's circle back to what you were talking about, the rats. Because so you said that because you kind of got into your origin story and everything, and when did you really get into keeping? When did it turn from just a hobby and having a pet snake into I want to try breeding this?
it was 2007. By then I was working at a reptile zoo in Buena Park called the Children's Living Nature Museum. I was helping out there, and then I was working at Radical Reptiles, which was Buena Park as well, and that's where I met Brandon and stuff. And I had I actually one of my first pairings was a pair of boa constrictors that had come into the shop, and I took them home and did all the brumation and stuff and got them to reproduce. That was the first thing I ever made was boa constrictor imperator, or well, now boa imperator. But and then that same year was a joint pairing with Brandon Wheeler with carpet pythons, and they were some homogenized carpet pythons. I mean, I think his was a Papua New Guinea, and then I think mine was a jungle carpet or something to that sort. I'm sure it wasn't a pure jungle, but that was the first year we ever produced anything, or I produced anything, was 2007, and then it slowly, I guess it fairly quickly became more and more. It wasn't until 2013 that I think my wife was like, you should really do this like for a living and actually create a business name and do this, at least more than just, producing things here and there. And um,
So your wife is awesome.
yeah, she is awesome. Yeah, she was the one that kind of kicked me into gear. I mean, every year it was, I would produce probably up until 2013, I probably produced, anywhere between 2 and 6 clutches, something like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, um, it was always something, but it wasn't a lot of consistency. I mean, um, and so, and I mean, I toyed with the idea when I was younger than that, but yeah, at that point, it was just kind of fun. I mean, I just wanted to produce stuff, and I didn't really care if it, made any money or anything like that. I mean, a lot of the time I was selling it to the shop that I worked at, and just to buy rats and stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
the big goal for me was that, the hobby could, if the hobby could pay for itself, that would be really nice, that I wasn't paying any money out of my pocket to take care of the animals. And my hobby has paid for itself for a fairly long time. I mean, which has been really nice. I mean, every bit of growth that the reptile business has made has been all on its own. I mean, I haven't spent a dime of my own personal money on a reptile in I don't know how long.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, it's cool. It's really nice to not have to kind of worry about that sort of thing. I mean, and fairly impressive when you think about I spend over $1,000 in just rats every month. I mean, and that's been that way for a fair amount of time. So, um, you know, um, it's nice. I mean, but it's a lot of work. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely times where I'm like, man, I wish I just had some big, one of each one of these species, and was able to keep them in big, huge, zoological type, enclosures, and just enjoy them, and not be worried about reproducing them. Um, but in the same breath, I love breeding them, and I love the interactions with customers. Getting some of these awesome species into people's hands that you know haven't haven't experienced this species or that. I mean, what was it, last year or the year before? It's twice now I've reproduced the Rockhampton locality coastal carpets. They're I was one last. It was last year or the year before it. The last time I produced them, I was only one of two people in the U.S. that did it.
Wow.
And that was a huge accomplishment to me. I mean, being able to sell those to the few people that I did, um, that's what this is all about, in my opinion. I mean, those interactions with customers. I don't work with a lot of kind of first time species, so I don't get a lot of the first time questions. I get more, a little bit more advanced questions usually. It's super rare that any of my stuff goes to like a first time, this is my first pet reptile or something.
Hmm.
Um, but still, I mean, those most of my customers over the years, have become friends. They've come back and they've bought more animals from me, and we talk enough that I mean, we start talking about life and different things, and most of those people have become my friends, and to me, that's what this hobby's all about. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for guys like Toby Derbyshire or Brandon Wheeler or Nick Mutton, lending me their ear and answering questions, and being helpful and communicative with me. Um, and so I try my best to do that for everybody else too. I mean,
That's awesome. Yeah, Nick speaks very highly of you.
oh, that's nice.
Yeah. He trusts you with his animals.
Yeah, Nick's so funny. Me and him have been friends now for a little while, but he came down to Southwest Carpet Fest one year. I was hosting at my house, and he caught me in the reptile room and was like, "Hey, man, I really like how you do business. I really like how you do you keep your reptiles. You know, I don't really make this offer to very many people, but I'd really like to, do more business with you. And he kind of gave me the rundown of and stuff. And I was dumbfounded because, I did my best not to shriek like a little girl, because I was in that same moment. I was hoping to find an opening that I could go, hey, can you sign my book? Like, um, and so it's funny. Even my wife, when he calls, me and Nick will be on the phone for like 2 or 3 hours, and my wife makes fun of me. She's like, "Oh, your other boyfriend's calling," and she's like, "I'll see you in a couple hours," and I'm like, "Hey." Um, she either calls him my boyfriend or my boss. Because that's how I take the phone call. It's like my boss is calling. When Nick starts dialing, calling me up, I'm like, oh, my boss is calling. Like, that's the impression I get. I mean, I'm just the employee here. I mean, but no, I love Nick. He's a great guy. I've been very fortunate that he's taken me under his wing, um, and been there to be a friend and answer questions and stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't be where I am today without guys like him that have already mapped out the road, and they're just willing to show me the map. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. It is such a cool hobby in that respect, that there are so many guys that have so much knowledge, and they're like chomping at the bit to share it with you.
yeah,
If you want to listen, and you want to leave your ego at the door and not say, yeah, but what about, and this and that, and just listen and listen to,
right.
that's one of the things I love most about the hobby, is if you have questions and if you want to try to do something, there's somebody to talk to for sure.
Yeah, yeah. There's somebody out there that you could talk to, even if they haven't done something. I mean, even some of the rare species, there's somebody that's tried something. I mean, there's somebody that's tried to do something, and pick their brain of what they've tried and failed at. I mean, you know, you I'm certainly, don't claim to be, some sort of expert. To me, I'm always the, student of the serpent. I mean, but I have failed plenty of times, and I've succeeded plenty of times. And if somebody who's not been, in this hobby as long as I have, wants to pick my brain, or shoot the breeze with me, I'm happy to answer questions and lend a helping hand. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people doing it for me, and so I'm the same way. But and quite frankly, I could talk about reptiles till the cows come home. So I mean, it's no sweat off my back. I mean,
Yeah, I'll be picking your brain plenty when it's time for me to breed some Argentines.
yeah, oh yeah, I could tell you all the things I haven't done successfully, and then the few times that I've been successful.
Well, by the time I'm ready, you should be have your room and your process refined, and you'll have it down pat.
I sure hope so. That's been one thing that's held me back over the years, is that I love a little bit of everything. And it's funny because you, I used to envy, and still sometimes do envy, the people that just work with, like ball pythons, or they just work with boa constrictors, or, I mean, they specialize in that one thing. And there's something to be said that, those people have it down to a science, that everything about their care and their room and everything is tuned in to those animals, and I can really appreciate that. But I love a lot of different species, and I can't just keep that one thing. Not to mention, from a business standpoint, it's not a great thing to have all your eggs in one basket. I'm very fortunate that from a business side of things, I can be really successful with bull snakes this year, and then maybe next year bull snakes drop down and they don't sell as well, or maybe I don't have a good production year, and I still have boa constrictors or carpet pythons and some of my other rarer python species like blood pythons or olive pythons that I can still have two legs to stand on of the tripod, to survive. If my incubator crashes and they kill everything in it, I still have, bull snakes that aren't in the incubator. They're sitting on the top of the rack. Incubating. I still have boa constrictors that are gonna, produce and have nothing to do with the incubator. And from a business standpoint, that's just good business. You shouldn't have all your eggs in one basket. And so, I like that I do a lot of different things. It keeps me engaged and interested, but it is more difficult because, this species needs this and this species needs that, and that it's difficult to keep all of that in one room. My bull snakes and colubrids have to roll out into the garage every year to hibernate, and then my Argentines and my Bredl's pythons have to go down into the garage at night during winter. But then I got to bring them, back or or at least up in temperature during the day, because they can't, sit there at the cold temperatures all day long like a bull snake or a colubrid can. So it's a lot to keep up with, especially having a regular job and stuff like that. So, but
do you know how many species you've bred?
Not a number off the top of my head, but I've produced corn snakes, bull snakes, green tree pythons, the Biak locality green tree pythons, carpet pythons. I've produced coastals, jungles, Nova Guineas, if that kind of is a popwin. So I guess popwins. I haven't produced normal popwins. Darwin carpets. What else? Argentine boas, crawl K boas, longtail boas, boa constrictor, imperator. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. Blood
you have
pythons.
a really, really diverse collection.
Yeah, I when I worked at a reptile zoo, we had, I don't know, somewhere in the realm of like 400 different species or something. It was everything you could think of, in the early 2000s and, late 90s that if you could get it, they had it. And so I was exposed to like tons of stuff. Things that I look back and I kick myself. We had probably one of the largest groups of Dumerals boas, all wild caught, mind you. Yeah.
What?
Before Dumerals boas were ever popular, the reptile zoo, I think, had a group of, it was like 8 females and 4 males or something like that. It was probably all legally wild caught before it became, illegal to do, from Madagascar. And looking back, I had tons of F1, opportunities that I could have, the genetic diversity of that group. I'm sure was, huge. And looking back, I kick myself. I didn't get more of them. I think I got an F1 at some point. I had them for a couple of years and I sold them off. I was like, I didn't even realize the value there until, much later, that I'm like,
oh man, that's wild.
Yeah. And they were just in a huge enclosure. I think it was like 8 by 5 by 4 or something like that. And they were communally housed. The entire group was in this giant enclosure. They reproduced every year.
Wow.
Tons of F1 babies, super awesome. Um, and yeah, no, I was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like Macklot's pythons are another one that were super popular back then, and we could get them for like I don't know $50 or something. Um, I could have been swimming in Macklot's pythons, and stupid me, I'm like, no, I'll wait till later. Now I just bought my second pair of Macklot's pythons last year, or the year before, and they were like $400 or something. I mean,
Yeah. They're a cool animal. If I had the room, there's so many more species I would get, but
oh yeah, there's so
it's
many. I fell in love with all this stuff kind of all at once, and so when it came down to okay, what am I going to keep and what am I going to breed, and um, it was hard not to just choose everything, and so now I draw weird arbitrary lines in the sand of where I can't cross. I mean, um, just dumb stuff like I work with bull snakes. I only work with bull snakes. I won't work with gophers and I won't work with pine snakes.
hmm.
Um, I just there's too many different types of bull snake between localities and mutations that I couldn't keep up. There's no way that I could keep bulls, gophers, and pines and all the other stuff that I do. It's just not. I mean, I would have to have some giant facility. Um, and so I just draw an arbitrary line in the sand that pines and gophers are off limits, and I just don't buy them. No matter how cool they are, no matter how awesome, it doesn't matter. I mean, um, blood pythons are kind of the same way. I only work with blood pythons, and then the pumpkin head Sumatran shorttails, Python Curtis. I don't have black the black Python Curtis. I don't have the silvers. I don't have any of the Borneo pythons. I can't do it. I don't have the space. I mean, so just weird arbitrary lines in the same. Boa constrictors, I don't have any mutations.
Hmm.
I will get, I will eventually get some mutations of the locality and subspecies stuff that I work with. Like, I want T positive Argentine boas. I think those are fantastic. But, like, I won't get boa constrictor imperator or boa imperator, like morphs and stuff like sunglows. And I think some of that's really cool. But I don't have the space. I mean,
Hmm.
I can't keep it all. And there's still species on my list that I want that I don't have. So, yeah, there's just weird arbitrary lines in the sand that I don't cross, and um, it's worked out okay so far. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I feel you there. It's if you don't draw those lines, then you would just you could just go totally haywire and just get out of control so easily.
oh yeah, and I find stuff that I will stop working with on occasion. I worked with green tree pythons for a long time, and I had a real hard time breeding them in California. I probably have a fairly easy time here in Tennessee, but I I hated how picky the babies were. Getting the babies started was awful,
Mm.
and um, and I'm kind of lazy in that regard. I don't. If you don't want to eat, you don't want to survive. I have a really hard. Now I will do every magic trick in the book that I've ever learned to get you to eat. But I don't want to work that hard. Um, and so green trees just were for me something that I moved away from. I don't have any green tree pythons anymore. I don't plan to get any green tree pythons. Um, yeah, they're
Does
they're
that
one I
stress you
just.
out universally if you have an animal that doesn't want to eat?
Oh yeah. Um, I've got Rockhamptons as a good example. My female drops her rat every single time I feed her.
Mm.
And it takes me 2 years to get her back up to breeding size so I could breed her. Every other carpet python I could feed and I could breed them every year. I give them a year off because I'm, trying to be nice and not, blow them out. And this snake will not. I can offer the food 4 or 5 times and she won't eat it. There's just times where she just won't eat. She'll kill it or try and kill it every time, but she'll drop it and then lose interest. And I can only come back, so many times and continue to offer her food before at some point I have to give up and just say, okay, she's not going to eat this time. And so, yeah, it takes me about 2 years to get her back up to, breeding weight for me to feel comfortable in reproducing
Wow.
her. And yeah, it drives me up the wall. I hate crappy feeders. If you're a crappy feeder, I'll do whatever it takes to get you up to par. But yeah, they don't tend to stick around at my house. I mean, I'll sell them to somebody who wants a pet that isn't worried about they're obviously feeding and healthy by the time I sell it, but yeah, they don't stick around my house. I can't stand things that don't want to eat. I mean, I don't feed that heavy. I think the worst thing to happen to a reptile is to have a schedule, or at least a snake is to have a schedule feeding day. It's not how they survive in the wild, and so I mean, and it pretty much sucks to be a male in my house. Once you get sexually mature, you get enough food to keep a good body weight and be healthy, and that's it. I mean, you are not packing on the pounds at my house. And so, yeah, I don't feed very heavy. And so if it's something that doesn't eat, it's a real pain because, I mean, I have to go back on days that I wouldn't normally feed to try and get, that animal to eat. And it takes a lot of effort. And it's super frustrating. I mean, I want them to be happy and healthy. And so I'm going to do whatever it takes. But, man, it's frustrating as all get out when something won't eat.
Yeah, I feel you. I know I have one that I've stayed up like 2 hours past when I wanted to go to
Yep.
bed, because it's like, all right, I'm going to wait until it's as dark as possible and he's as
Right.
active as possible and he's cruising and
Yep.
I'm going to make sure it's super hot. And meanwhile, everything else ate 4 hours earlier,
Yep.
when the sun was still up. And
I've gone in there with headlights and like it's pitch black in the room and I'm trying to find my way. I'm tripping on stuff. Like I mean, yeah,
I'm texting my wife in the dark, don't come in here because he might take it.
Yeah. Don't flip on the light. I mean, or I'm like hiding underneath the tub, like, and trying to offer it so they can't see my face. I mean, all they see is tongs or.
I know.
Oh, man.
Have you found that they're more likely to take something if you drop? Just go in there, don't dangle it, don't do anything. Just go in there, drop it, and walk away.
It's totally dependent on the species, in my experience. Bull snakes, corn snakes, yeah, absolutely. They're afraid of me, and that's their main concern, and they're not paying attention to the food at all. If I just open their enclosure and set, at least for babies, if I set their rodent down on the floor and close the tub, they'll smell it, they'll find it, they'll eat it every time. It's very rare that those guys won't eat. When they won't eat is if I open the tub and I'm offering something to them because they see this, me towering over their enclosure, and I'm trying to, offer them this, little, wet rodent or whatever. Carpet pythons, I get a mixed bag. Sometimes they'll prefer me to set it on their perch and they'll eat it. Other times, it's got to be something where I'm kind of, I got to tease, in front of their face for them to get the idea. And if you just left it in there, they just won't even, bother. Um, Boa constrictors, depending on the species or subspecies, I've got kind of the same thing, mixed bag, where sometimes I got to tease it, or because if you set it down there, they'll just, ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So you have
um,
boas with a poor feed response?
no, babies sometimes, yeah.
Mm.
Uh, Adults, no.
Yeah.
I don't have anything that won't come flying out of the cage at you.
Dude, those Argentines are like a shotgun going off when they hit their prey. Oh my
You
God.
better be able to jump. Yeah.
My
Um,
son was like sitting there like wide-eyed, like, oh my God, what just happened? Because the first time we fed her, she just smashed that rat. And then
they hit
the last
so hard.
dude, the last time I fed her, I took the lid off after she had eaten and she thought that it was more food coming in and
Yep.
she struck the lid and I felt the
Yep.
force of her pushing it
Oh,
off
yep.
and I was like and the sound of it and she's just sitting there. I had to grab the hook and tap her on the nose and even that didn't turn it off. She still
No.
sat there and was like, "Where's the food at?"
Yeah.
You
Where's the
know?
food at? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was bananas. It's bananas how hard they hit.
Yeah. They'll hit really hard. Them and blood pythons. The blood pythons hit incredibly hard too. They've got they'll throw their whole body at something. It's amazing because you think of blood pythons. Oh, it's just short kind of fat snake that just lays there and does nothing all day. And but they're more like, I always compare them to gaboon vipers. Being they're just lightning quick. And they'll toss their entire body at something and hit it like a ton of bricks.
Mm.
They're the blood pythons. Actually, I've learned a trick to get them started. I've got a lot of baby blood pythons started from the wild. Actually, when I first got into blood pythons, that's all you could get was wild stuff. And for whatever reason, blood pythons have this weird thing that if you rub the side of their cheek with the rodent up and down like this, all of a sudden they do this like sideways bite and wrap.
Huh.
I've never had a blood python fail to start with that trick. And I have adults that still, like do that. I'll put it, I'll dangle up, a rodent in front of them, and they'll just kind of look at it like. And it isn't until I rub that cheek that all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, like this is what's going on. But yeah,
That's a
the
good tip.
Argentines will just come flying out. You open that cage and you better be out of the way. Them and olive pythons are too. Even any of the Lyasis stuff, in my experience, they're flying out with their mouth open.
Wow.
But my adult bull snakes are the same way. If they smell the food, you know, if any of those three species smell food in the room, they're flying out. And I'll have boas bite each other. I've had, like springtime, I'm starting to, I'm ramping up the food on a lot of species, but I've got, boa constrictors in together breeding. And sometimes I've noticed them locking up a lot in the last, couple days, I won't pull them for food. I'll just leave them, let them breed. Because a lot of time the male, could care less about the food he's busy with other things. And, but the female, she could care less about the male. And, if she smells food, I've, they're smacking into the glass or, hitting the tub that they're in while I'm walking by because they just saw, a shadow move past. And yeah, they'll hit it like a ton of bricks.
That's what I love about boas so much is just their drive to eat. They just love to
Yeah,
eat.
which is why a lot of people get them fat.
Yeah.
You see a lot of imperator, be these 9 foot, like 50-pound snakes, and it's like that's not what that snake's supposed to be. I mean, um, can they get that big? Yeah, potentially. I mean, but it should take them 30 years to get there. I mean,
Hmm.
um, and that's why, it goes back to something I said earlier about, the worst thing to happen to a reptile or a snake is, a feeding schedule. It's like in the wild, they're not experiencing, a rat, a perfectly, appropriate sized rodent being served on a silver platter every, 14 days or every, 2 weeks or whatever. I mean, um, and so, there's times where I'll feed everything, one size smaller than what they normally get because I, me or my daughters miscounted something and I've got more small rats. And so, I'll feed something more, small rodents or small rats instead of, they would normally eat a medium rat. And then, a couple things, I had an extra, maybe I thaw a couple larges, for those animals that would have gotten a medium, but I didn't, get enough mediums and, you know, um, or I didn't thaw enough mediums and I feed them the next day, when I'm feeding the other half of the animals or something. But, um, you got to keep it irregular and you can't feed the crap out of them. People, I've watched way too many animals, blood pythons or boa constrictors. I've seen people, have these huge snakes, and you're feeding it to death. I mean, you wonder why some of these snakes live, 5 to 6 years. And it's like they should be living somewhere in the realm of 10 to 15 to 30. I mean, um, most of this stuff has a fairly long life expectancy, and you know, it's just like people. I mean, who lives forever? The the little old Asian lady that eats 100 calories a day. I mean, and who lives a really short period of time? Well, the big wrestlers that are 400 or 500 pounds of pure muscle. That I mean, their heart gives out. It's like it reptiles aren't any different. I mean, at least in that regard, is that we can certainly feed them to death. I mean,
Oh yeah.
their bodies aren't meant to take on that many calories in a short period of time. They're opportunistic feeders. They'll eat whenever the opportunity strikes, pretty much. I mean, in many respects, anyway. And if you offer it on a silver platter every 7 days, they'll probably eat it, but they'll also probably die of a heart attack. I mean,
Yeah, I've been focusing more on uh their body and how their body looks,
yeah,
and going off their activity too, and their
yeah,
body language. What are they telling you? If they're in their hide, and you're coming in the room at night and they're still in their hide, then
yeah,
they're probably still pretty solid. They're not looking for a meal. So yeah, there's definitely not a hard and fast rule,
no,
and a lot of people, especially, you got to figure, like, brand new keepers, they're keeping ball pythons, and or maybe a boa, and they don't digest their food ultra fast, so you
no,
could really run into a problem there if you're feeding every 7 days.
yeah, yeah. I mean, blood pythons are a great example. You see some of these blood pythons that are just massive. I mean, and yeah, they're supposed to be kind of, fat snakes. I mean, but if you cut one in half, how I always describe it is it should look like a tear shape. You should see that spinal column, and then they kind of round out at the bottom there. But, they shouldn't be perfectly round. I mean, um, and that's normally what people are looking for, is that they're trying to match kind of the ball python type look, where they're this perfectly round circle if you cut one in
Hmm.
half. And it's like and even them really aren't supposed to be like that. I mean, you're supposed to at least see a little bit of a, a spinal ridge there. I mean, but yeah, people will, feed the heck out of, animals, and um, yeah, it's something you got to be more cognizant of. I mean, I do the same thing with, if I can help it, leaner meat. I mean, if I can not feed a rat, olive pythons, for instance, like I'll feed, chicken if I can. In the wild, they're eating more, birds and reptiles than they are probably rodents. I mean, um, and and even if they're really long snakes, it doesn't mean that they're eating a rabbit. I have probably a 9.5 foot. She's got to be 9 or 10 feet. My one of my big olive python females,
Jeez
and
Louise.
yeah, she's huge. But she's thin. So, my goodness. I need an office, man. I'm telling you. Um, but I mean, she's not that thick around. I mean, she's probably like, the size of a soda can, maybe a little bigger. Um, you know, and so she's all length. I mean, and so I don't feed her like some giant, rabbit.
Hmm.
Most of the time I'm feeding her like an extra large rat. I mean, maybe two extra large rats, you know what I mean? Or I'm feeding her a small chicken, you know what I mean? Or a guinea hen or something, they're, I'm not trying to put some giant lump in her, for her to digest. And sometimes she's eaten small rabbits. I mean, but it's rare. It's usually only because I've, all the Argentine, somebody was in shed and didn't want to eat or something weird like that. I mean, um, I tend to not really have. That's the biggest species of snake I work with anymore. I don't keep retics or berms or anything like that anymore.
Why not?
I had a fairly close encounter with a 20-foot, 350-pound berm.
No
That,
way.
yeah, at the zoo that I worked, we had a 20-foot, 350-pound berm, and a 14-foot, about 150-pound berm, and we had them together in this huge walk-in enclosure, and we had to pull them out to clean the cage one day, and we had like, I don't know, it was me, the curator, the head curator, and probably like 4 or 5 other people. I mean, it's a huge, these are huge snakes. I mean, and we had pulled them out. We had cleaned the enclosure, while a couple people were like supervising the snakes, on the ground in the hallway there, and we were feeding the big girl. And of course, like, it wasn't like big rabbits. We had like gotten a bunch of smaller rabbits, and so she ate like 4 or 5 of these things. And Me and the curator sitting there, BSing, and we look down and we realize she's about halfway done, and we go for the next rabbit, and we realize that there's no more rabbits,
Mm.
and so then we look up and we realize that just us two are standing here. There's nobody around, and so one of us runs out to the other part of the area to get a hold of somebody. Yeah, everybody's left. It's us two that we've got to
Oh
put
my
this
God.
350-pound Burmese python back in her enclosure. Luckily, we weren't too far from the enclosure, but still, that big of a snake that doesn't want to go, and she's busy eating her rabbit, was not very interested in doing what we wanted it to do. And we immediately started, pulling her to get her into the enclosure, in hopes that she would not finish the rest of the rabbit, and have, a mouth open. Because she wasn't the nicest of snakes. She was brought into the zoo, from somebody that wasn't taking care of her. And so, she had not the greatest of attitudes. And anyway, we're shoving her into this enclosure. I'm on my knees, trying to shove this big snake in. And my buddy, who's the head curator, has got a corn broom that's basically holding it, in front of me, and he's pushing the 14-footer back because she's striking at me, and at 20 feet long, she goes into the enclosure. She's able to kind of turn back around and come back on herself, and she strikes at me, and she would have grabbed me right in the face. She was really close. He shoves the corn broom down in front of my face. It hits the corn broom. The broom, scratches me in the face, and I get the last couple feet of this snake into her enclosure while he shuts the door. And I was like, yeah, I don't ever need to have that at
Oh
my
my
house.
God.
Man, I had a berm and two retics at the time that were much smaller. I think my berm was like 12 feet and like 160 pounds or something like that. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't ever need to have that problem by myself.
I mean, if she would have gotten your face and wrapped, that probably would have broke your neck.
She would very well could have. I mean, just the impact alone could have, got me. And she, at 20 feet, 350 pounds, she probably could have killed us both if she had, while we were dragging her to the enclosure. I mean, she could have just wrapped us both, and we wouldn't have been able to do much about it.
How did this happen? I mean, like, weren't you guys like, what? Isn't it a team effort?
It should have been. It was a team effort to get her out, and then it just the team dispersed, and we didn't realize it. It wasn't like it was some AZA accredited zoo or anything. It was a private zoo that
Wow.
So yeah, just not as well organized as it probably should have been, and I've had friends pulled into enclosures at 18-foot berms. I had a buddy in Arizona get he was feeding a rabbit to an 18-footer. It missed the rabbit, grabbed a hold of his leg, and it grabbed and pulled so hard that it actually swept him off his feet and drug him into the enclosure.
Wow.
And I mean, she let go, obviously, but I mean, yeah, there's some people, and I have some really good friends that work with retics and berms and stuff, and God bless them for it. But yeah, I won't work with that stuff. My daughter and my wife wouldn't be able to pull something like that off of me, and so yeah, I won't work with anything like that. I mean, that was one thing that my wife, set into motion that makes a lot of sense as we both sat down after that first year and we started, keeping stuff and at least on a larger scale, breeding more and stuff. And she was like, nothing that's, venomous and nothing that's, big enough that, it could be a danger to us or the kids. And we've stayed with that fairly, I had some rear fang stuff that I got rid of for that same reason.
Would you have like false water cobras or?
Yeah, I had false water cobras. I actually had one of the first few hypomelanistic false water cobras. I'm good friends with the Wes Pollock, one of the first guys to produce those.
Nice.
I had some. I had a mangrove snake. They were incredible to work with. And then I had Madagascan giant hognose. I had a couple of those. And yeah, I did away with all that. I like a lot of species, and I just didn't need anything that was gonna, potentially I tend to have fairly bad allergic reactions to just something as simple as a bee sting. So like
Mm.
the last thing I need to die is, die of anaphylaxis from a, false water cobra bite or something. I mean, or God forbid, hurt one of my kids or something. I'd never live with myself.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. So, how big is your biggest blood python? Because I know you were saying that you don't keep yours really big. Like, how long do you think they are?
My biggest girl isn't really fully grown yet, I don't think, which is funny because so I've cheated with my production of blood pythons. I have males at two of my buddies' houses, and I've never produced blood pythons in house.
Oh,
Um, I um, I've produced a fair amount of blood pythons, but they're all at. I have a male at Brian Cusco's house, and I have a male at my buddy Chris's house. And yeah, they send me baby blood pythons every year. I mean,
nice.
yeah, it's a. Oh, sorry, I gotta move my desk here. Um, yeah, they're. I have a holdback female from one of the clutches. She's a matrix possible het T positive that I held back. She's probably my biggest girl right now, and she's probably 5.5 feet long, maybe 5 feet long, somewhere in that
Okay.
ballpark. She's almost fully grown. I would imagine. Probably next year I'll try and pair her. They're, but yeah, I mean they're not. But I'm really weird about feeding blood pythons. I'm really slow with them. They're one that I find gets overfed so much that I'm really probably overly cautious with them. And she's plenty old enough to probably breed, but I don't think she's got the size for it yet. But yeah, I mean she could probably. I mean she feeds fairly regularly on what 2 or 3x rats. I mean, so she's got some good
Yeah.
size. I mean, but yeah, I still want to give her another year. She'll finish out this season, and then I'll probably start pairing her next season. I could have tried to pair her this season, but the only male that I would probably want to pair her with is my GoldenEye het T positive. So, and he's kind of young, so I'm going to give him one more season, and then I'll pair him up. But yeah, they don't need to be huge snakes. I mean, as far as like enclosures are concerned, my adult blood python females can live in the V180s, the big boa tubs,
Mhm.
and they tend to do better in my experience than in a glass front enclosure. They're going to bury themselves anyhow, and so you're just going to have a cage full of dirt, and so they do, I think, better in the tubs. They're easier to keep with high humidity without it being, too swampy, and still have enough good air, air ventilation.
What do you keep their temps at?
They actually keep it fairly warm. I mean, they're in the racks with, other boas and pythons, so they have a 90-degree hotspot. And then like an 80 ambient. But that's a species that I never see bask. They are, even after they eat a meal, they're not over there on the heat tape, sitting on the heat. They
Mhm.
don't like it that hot. And so I tend to keep them on the lower levels of the racks, so that they don't, they don't get as high of an ambient, because they don't like really hot temperature. Where they live, it's basically 80 degrees all the freaking time. And yeah, they're not going to go bask. I mean, that snake's going to sit there. They're going to find a comfortable place for them to kind of bury themselves and look like the leaf litter. And then they're not going to move until, they have to go to the bathroom, or they have to, they find something to eat. And until that hiding spot, has been ruined by either them going to the bathroom or some other, means, they're going to stay there. And so they don't need it hot, and they're not going to bask. I mean, and so realistically, once I get enough of them, they'll get to a point where that each rack that they're in will just be them, and they probably won't have any type of heat source. They don't utilize it. So, I mean, if anything, it would probably be better to give them a little bit more of an enclosure to move around in, and not, kind of have a wasted space. The only times I've ever seen them do anything with that hot spot is they'll sometimes throw a coil over the heat, but they'll be, kind of loosely, buried under, and they'll have the majority of their body off the heat source, and they'll just have one little coil, in a spot where they're getting belly heat. But yeah, they don't like it hot. I mean, it's hot, but it's not hot, if that makes sense. I mean,
yeah, that's what I've been hearing more and more, is that they like low to mid 80s, and that's like their happy spot.
Well, you got to think that in Indonesia, they're hiding in the leaf litter, probably heavily, lots of heavy forest, or jungle, and sitting in water, swampy, real swampy type. And they're probably not getting they're probably getting like dappling, from sunlight, and not a lot of, crazy, sitting there baking in the sun. Now, I mean, obviously that's all speculation, but I mean, I found more and more species that, probably don't need it as hot as, we make it sometimes. I mean, and they're one that bull snakes are another one that I used to keep them with a 90-degree hotspot, because I figure, oh man, Texas, it's got to be, hot. I mean, they hate it. They'll rub the crap out of their nose. They'll be super high strung. You can see that they're physically and mentally stressed from heat. Soon as you turn the heat off, all of a sudden, you get a whole nother animal. They're moving about, out of curiosity. They're not rubbing the crap out of their face. There's a whole lot of their metabolism is still lightning quick. I mean, but they don't need to consume 2 times the amount of food that they were when they were super hot. And so now I just for the longest time, I don't even have any heat source on that enclosure. I mean, on any of my bull snakes, they sit at the ambient room temperature, and they don't have any hot spot or anything like that. I don't have heat cables on any of those cages or any of the heat lights or anything like that on. They don't like it. In the heat of the day, when they're, when you think of like, Texas or some of these localities as being hot, they're hiding. They're shoved down into a burrow. I mean, ball pythons aren't any different. I mean, ball pythons in the heat of the day in Africa, they're down in an 80-degree tunnel down, underground. And they're coming out when it's 80 degrees, above the surface, and then they're going to go look for water and food and things like that. And so, do they need a 90-degree hotspot? Probably not. I mean, they're they're probably 100% content sitting at 80 degrees. I mean, and not needing that. So
Do you use UV on any of your animals?
the Argentines, I do.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah. The Argentines, I do. I also, um, uh, I have some lizard species, like I have an Australian water dragon and a bearded dragon and turtles, and I have a box turtle and a couple different things. I have a legless lizard, European legless lizard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they all have UV. But yeah, the Argentines I use UV. Just a little strip UV bite, UV light. It's nothing crazy. I mean, it doesn't even necessarily light up the entire enclosure. They can go to the cool side of the room or the cage and get away from it and hide under the leaf litter or hide under the branches or tunnels that I've put in there, and get away from it. But um, yeah, I got into using some UV on them kind of accidentally. I mean, um, I just happened to already have a UV light in one of the cages on the that I moved a smaller Argentine into a bigger enclosure, and I just kind of ran with it. And then it seemed like they would seek out it over the heat source sometimes.
Mm.
Like I had it on the back half, so they weren't under the heat source; they were under the UV light. And I thought that was interesting, that they were seeking that out. And so now I've just kind of ran with it. I mean, I've never seen anything different other than that. I mean, but being a species that potentially, I mean, they're black, and they potentially get real cold during the winter. Um, I figured it can't hurt. I mean, but I mean, you got plenty of stuff that I think light has a big influence in a lot of species. Like even in my tubs and stuff, I don't use like solid color tubs. They're clear.
Hmm.
They're at least letting natural light into the enclosure, even if it's not overhead lighting. Even into my glass fronted cages and stuff. Even if I don't use UV lights on them, I have, the glass front is letting, natural light in and stuff. And to me, it makes too much sense to have natural light, being able to come into their enclosure. None of these animals live in a cave. I mean, and so they're getting some sort of natural light, and the difference between night and day is something that they can notice and tell. I mean, I certainly get stronger feeding reactions and different personalities when I come in when the lights are out than I do during the day. Some species midday are up and active and moving around, and others are more calm and relaxed. And then you come in 20-30 minutes after the lights go out, and all of a sudden the stuff that was super active during the day isn't, and then vice versa. Things that were sitting and not doing anything during the day all of a sudden are up and moving around and curious and things like that. And so it makes too much sense to me to do it that way. I refuse to use anything that is opaque, and then completely void of light. There's so few species of snake or reptile in general that don't have any type of sunlight or need. Do I think they need it? I don't think so. I have species that I have individual animals that I've had since I started keeping snakes, and they're 15, 20, 30, I think the oldest thing I have is like 20 years old. But I mean, Um, they've lived all this time without, any type of UV or anything like that. It's not like they're going out in the sun on a sunny day out on the front lawn or anything with me. So, um, they're happy and healthy, but I think light in general. I mean, if like the enclosures you have behind me or behind you, I mean, there's no doubt that I would have lights in there. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
they're not UV lights. I mean, depending on the species, um, but they're going to have lights. I mean, I have some enclosures like that have lights in them that olive python is in one like that where my big female, she doesn't. It's not UV lights, but it's lights. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, because that enclosure isn't going to get a lot of natural sunlight, and I doubt she's going to live in the dark. You know what I mean? So, but
Yeah, I mean, how it's gotta be enriching for them to have a normal day night cycle. I mean,
yeah,
I keep UV on everything that's in a cage like this. That's just my preference. It's just it's easier to pick one thing and go with it. If they're in a
yeah,
tub, they're just getting ambient light from around them. But yeah, I mean, and it's low. It's six. I think it's the 6% Arcadia, T5 bulbs, and
right,
honestly, those warm the cage a lot. And I think I put it on half the cage. So, like you said, if they want to get away from it, they can go to the darker, cooler side,
right,
and that's their choice.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, and if you've got a large enough enclosure, there's no harm in doing that. I mean, we're spending more, money, but at the end of the day, I mean, it can't be as long as you set it up right. It can't be something that's detrimental to them. I mean, you can certainly do it poorly. You have too high a wattage, and it's too hot, or they
Hmm.
have no escape from it, and I mean, and then you're just frying them with UV. I mean, there's ways to do it incorrectly for sure, but I mean, if done properly, I think it's a great thing. I mean, um, that's one thing that I can certainly attest to being a breeder for all these all these years is that if you have the opportunity to have big display enclosures and have lots of plants, whether it be real or fake plants and branches and all sorts of things, and set it up as much as possible to a natural type environment. It's worth every penny that you do. I mean, um, that's that's one thing that I can certainly attest to is that I have all the time. I'll pull open a tub or I'll open up a very basic enclosure and be like, man, I wish that this thing was twice as big and had all kinds of tunnels and I mean you know I I don't I don't love to keep things in small enclosures. I mean, but I have to keep things in more appropriate sized enclosures and more basic setups because I have to. I couldn't keep up. I mean, with all the species, and not everybody has to be a breeder either. I think that's where we kind of went wrong as a hobby for a little while there, and maybe even a little still, is that you have so many people that you know they're just getting into it, and they're like, "Oh, I want to be this huge ball python breeder," and it's like, what if you don't? I mean,
Yeah.
what if you didn't? I mean, not because I want to crush anybody's dreams or anything, but because it doesn't. You don't have to do that. I mean, um, you know, you don't you don't have to want to breed these things to have fun and enjoy it, um and maybe we shouldn't all breed it. I mean, or at least not all of us try and be a some sort of breeding company where
Yeah.
um I'm jealous as all hell of people that, have got big enclosures and stuff like that. I mean, so
Yeah, that's something I've talked to, a lot of the people that I've gotten animals from is I've said like this is, for me it's going to be a pet first,
right.
and I there's certain things that I want to breed, and if it doesn't happen it's not that big of a deal because they're going to be pets, but for the love of the species, like the Timor pythons, I have a reverse trio of them. I'm probably never going to get them to breed, but it would be really cool if
Never
I
know.
did,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It doesn't have to, I think that's the sweet spot in the hobby, is, having stuff that you really like. And you breed some of it, you don't breed some of it. Um, that's probably the perfect, spot to be in. At least for the majority of folks. I love being a breeder. I love all the encounters that I have with people. I'd love to do this, for a living. And I'll certainly get there one day, even if that's just in my retirement of, my regular job. And, I do the reptiles full time at that point. But um, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's fun to breed. It's a whole nother, ball game, so to speak, with each one of the species. I've had species that I've absolutely loved working with, and then I go to breed them, and I'm like, I hate these things. I mean, I don't want to breed these things. I mean, uh, I found that with the Solomon Island ground boas, the
Mm,
Candoya carinata paulsoni. Awesome snakes. I've been in love with them forever. Finally got around to getting some, raised them up, bred them. I've bred them now twice unsuccessfully. I've only had a couple, survive, and most of them didn't survive for long. Um, they when they're born, they could roll up on like a nickel.
yeah.
They're
I killed
so
one.
tiny.
I've killed one
Yeah,
before.
I've killed a lot more than one. They're horrible. I mean, they're so small. They sneak out of the enclosures. Um, I had to put them in little tiny deli cups because it's the only way you couldn't get them to escape. They'd be crawling out of the vent holes of some of my hatching racks. I mean, they're impossibly small. They don't want to eat anything but some crazy frog,
I know.
um, or gecko scent, and what do you feed it? You got to feed it like mice feet, like,
I
and
know. It's so
mice
crazy.
tails, and they're awful. I mean, just they're
You know
awful.
what? You know what's funny too is I've seen people get them and go, I don't know why everybody's complaining. Mine eats just fine, blah blah blah. And it's like,
The
well,
adults
yours,
eat like perfectly. I
yeah,
mean,
yours is as thick as a Sharpie.
yeah,
It's not a baby.
nope.
You've gotten a very well started animal from somebody that bred them and did a really good job getting that
Or it
animal up
was
to
wild
size.
caught. Most of them are still wild caught these days. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not many people produce them. I mean, because yeah, they're in fact a lot of the people that have produced them didn't even produce them. They, a gravid female came in and
Mm,
they gave birth and they got lucky in getting the baby started. I mean,
yeah.
or they were experienced enough to get the baby started. But yeah, I killed a bunch of those damn things. They're
They're
horrible.
so cool though.
They're oh
They're
so
so
cool. They're
cool. Especially even when
little
they're
viper mimics. I mean, yeah, it's like
yeah.
a blood python and a you know, I mean, they're I mean, blood pythons are to me a viper type mimic, and so are they. They're yeah, super cool. They come in a billion different colors. I mean,
Mhm.
when you do breed them, you never know what color they're going to pop out as. It doesn't matter what color the parents are. They're come out in all kinds of crazy colors. I mean, yeah, fascinating animals. Um, I had one. I sold or gave to whatever a female that had given birth to a bunch of stillborns, and
Mm.
I sold it to Nick, um, and like a year later he called me and he's like, dude, she just pushed out this mummified baby.
Oh my God.
And I was like, dude, I bred those last year. I mean,
That's disgusting.
yeah. I mean, but she, no problems. Like, I mean, push that thing out, no big deal. Like, moving on. Like, a year later, like,
Wow.
what the heck? Like, it would have killed any other, any other thing. I mean, but
Man. I remember getting one from a show, and it was a total impulse buy. And I had seen them, and I never thought I would see one at a reptile show, and I saw it there, and I had a friend with me, and I'm like, what do I even feed it? And he's like, pinky parts or a mouse part,
right.
and yeah, I got it home, and the thing would not eat, and I was way over my head, and it died. I was so sad.
It's yeah, and well, yeah, and man, losing animals sucks. You know, they're that's something else that people don't take into consideration when they're wanting to be a breeder is that like these are living, breathing animals, and they don't care if you are super tired from work that day, or you got a million things going on. They have to be taken care of. I mean, and so there's a lot of time where you should be hanging out with your family or your friends, and you're going to be picking up snake shit. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then on top of it, stuff happens. You know, I've lost multiple carpet pythons to cancer.
Mm.
I mean, or somebody gets egg bound, or I mean, the more animals you keep, the more the odds, are stacked in, against you that, bad things are going to happen. Um, you may with five or six snakes, somebody may never encounter a snake dying of cancer or dying of a respiratory infection or something like that. I mean, but when you have 300 snakes, I mean, that stuff happens. I mean, you lose the occasional baby to failure to thrive. They just won't eat, no matter what tricks and you do. They're just they're guaranteed to starve themselves. I mean, they're just it happens. I mean,
Yeah.
you get stuff born weird. I've had a corn snake that was three corn snakes in one clutch that their brain was on the wrong side of their skull when they were born. I mean,
What?
yeah. Yeah, you get crazy, weird
How
birth
does that
defects.
happen 3 times in one clutch?
I don't know. I mean, I guess inbreeding depression. I mean,
Mm.
I was never going to figure it out. I refused to breed those two animals together again because I figured, well, just in case that it was inbreeding depression, we're not going to do that again. But yeah,
They
I've
were
had,
dead, I'm assuming. Like they didn't.
nope, they were alive.
What?
They hatched.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, they hatched, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? I mean,
What's up with
um,
your haircut?
yeah, I'm like that. I've had, I had, I think the craziest one was a bull snake that all the other rest of the clutch had hatched, and so I took a razor and cut it open. Um, I like to see okay, what went wrong. Did we lose it a week ago, 2 weeks ago? I mean, what stage of development did we lose this egg? Maybe I know why. Maybe I can change something for the future. Um, anyway, I cut open the egg, and it was the perfect shape of the interior of the egg. It was just scaled. There was no head. There was no tail. There was just the shape of an egg that was scaled.
What?
Yeah. It did have a row of belly scales in one section, but the rest of the body was the dorsal scales. Had a very odd misshapen pattern to it, but yeah, it was just the shape of an egg.
Do you preserve
Uh,
any of those
I
weird
should have
things?
kept that.
You totally
I
should
didn't
have.
I didn't even take a picture. I'm so mad at myself. I mean, I've told that story now multiple times, and everyone's like, "Why didn't you take a picture?" And I'm like, "Dude, I was so baffled, and that I was doing some other stuff. I was cleaning cages at the time, and I cut that open. I was putting babies away, and I literally threw it in the trash, like, um, and yeah, I kick myself all the time for not taking a picture of that thing. It was crazy. Yeah, no head, no tail, no nothing. It was just the exact shape of an egg with scales. But I've had stuff. I haven't had the two head thing, but I've had all kinds of weird stuff. You get stuff that's kinked. I mean, they've got some big old crazy spine kink that, I mean, you're never gonna get food past, or you know what I mean. Like, yeah, it that kind of stuff happens. I mean, not every baby is, designed to live long. You figure out in the wild, the average is one of each one of these clutches, or litters, are supposed to survive till adulthood to breed. I
Mm,
mean, that's the odds. I mean, so the fact that I keep, 15 or 16 of these things out of a clutch, of 17 or 18, I mean, that's freaking impressive. I mean, um, we can control a lot more of the variables, but yeah, you deal with that kind of stuff, and you have to be used to that thing. I mean, that kind of thing, or be open to it, because there's there's times where this hobby's going to break your heart. Um, I've lost animals that were super dear to me, that
mm,
lived 15, 16, 17 years old, and they died for one reason or another, and it breaks your heart. I mean, um, there's at that point, these animals are, like you said, they're pets, and not um, not some breeding project. I mean,
yeah.
and it sucks. I mean, it's like, you know, just like your dog passing away. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same, same feeling. They're part of the family. Um, for animals that have been around that long, and yeah, you have to deal with it. I mean, so
How many snakes have you lost to breeding, whether it's being egg bound or what's how dangerous is it to breed a boa? I mean, how like have you lost a lot of boas to breeding related
uh,
issues?
I've lost. I think I've only ever lost one boa to like breeding malfunctions.
Mm,
I had a Tarahumara uh, get like, you can't really call it egg bound, I guess, because they're not eggs, but
baby bound.
she yeah she couldn't push um, the babies out,
Mm,
and for whatever reason she was. I watched her trying. I gave her a day or two of her moving about her enclosure, and you could tell she was trying to give birth. Um, and I did my best to leave her alone and let her do her thing. And I was like, okay, it's time to take her to the vet, and try and see what we can do. And I went in there to bag her up, and she was upside down.
ah,
And so it yeah, it sucks. I mean, I bought those animals as babies, raised them up, 4 years, um, and then finally on the 4th year, I, did all brumation and all the, stuff to breed them and put them together, got them, got them together. And then, yeah, boom. I mean,
Mm.
she was dead, and it sucks. I mean, she was one of my, pets. I mean, um, and now I've got an adult male that, you know, um, that goes to a breeding lesson that I learned the hard way multiple times, is that don't just have a pair of something if you expect to actually produce it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, now I have an adult male and I can't get my hands on an adult female. I mean,
Yeah.
and my male is, now sat here for I think 2 seasons of doing nothing. I mean, um, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't been able to even find a baby female, at least time it right to pick up a baby and try and raise up a new female. So um, I find it more with carpet pythons and bull snakes, but then again, I produce more carpet pythons and bull snakes, so I don't know if that's plays in a factor. Um,
What are some of the big issues just getting egg bound?
yeah, egg binding has been the occasional one. Sometimes you get something that attacks each other, though. I mean, and then the male or the female is never quite the same. And I mean, I've had that happen before, where like a female grabbed a hold of the male, and I tried everything to try and get her off of him, and then after that, he was, he was a little wonky and weird. I mean, he's got a screw loose somewhere. You know what I mean? And then wouldn't breed, wouldn't do anything. He ate okay, but he was, um, it was more difficult to get him to eat. I've had stuff like that happen. I've had egg binding. I've had stuff random, like happen. I had a female that was egg bound one time that I was able to manually palpate the 2 remaining eggs out of her, and thought nothing of it. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give her a season off. I won't put her with any males, I just give her the season off to rest. And then after the season passed, I mean, long after what should have been, her season, all of a sudden she ovulated. And then she swelled up, and I'm like, okay, well, she's just gonna slug out. And then one day I walked in and she was dead.
Oh my
And
God.
like, um,
Can you explain that slugging out? So so she wasn't paired with anything.
yeah, so she ovulated. So if a snake ovulates, she's gonna produce something. And if the eggs are then not fertilized by a male, she would produce a slug. And so each one of the ova that she ovulated are going to be, just the raw egg, so to speak, of what she, had ovulated. And so it's a yellow, nasty looking, you know, ball or egg shaped or semi egg shaped thing, and it's usually really bad for them to produce it. It's usually harder for them to push that out than it is just a standard egg, so to speak, because they tend to get real messy, and it's soupy, and I mean if something went wrong, I mean if they're not and so yeah, it's definitely not a great thing. There's times where if a female ovulates, you're almost better off throwing a male in there if you can, and get them fertilized, because Um, yeah, it's all bad. But
Mm,
yeah, they're it's interesting. Um, the boas are the weirder version of it. Um, they're really yellow and nasty.
mm,
As where a lot of the time, even like a carpet python or a bull snake, they'll just be oddly shaped eggs where you're like, hey, that one's kind of yellow and misshapen and a lot smaller or something. They've had some sort of calcification go on. As where like boas, it's because boas are born in an embryonic sac in an individual embryonic sac. Their unfertilized ova is really gross. I mean,
mm.
it's it's funny. My daughter, when she was littler, we would have babies or something, and I'd be like, "Hey, one of the boas gave birth," and she's like, "Oh no, I'm not coming to help." Like, like that's a nasty, soupy mess that I don't want to deal with. Like eggs, she's all about it. She'll come down, even the biggest of snakes, she'll come down and help, pull eggs. But yeah, no, when the boas give birth, they're like, I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
but
What have you noticed? What temperatures do your Argentines prefer when they're pregnant?
hot.
Hot.
Yeah. Um, as soon as they seem gravid, they'll go off food, and they want it scorching hot. They'll be huddled up on the under the heat source, and just seem desperate for it.
Hmm.
Um, but then they're interesting to watch because like a carpet python is similar, that they want that heat source when they're gravid. But a carpet python will like have a tight coil under that heat spot, and bake, so to speak. As where the Argentine will do that for a little bit, but then they'll go to the cool side and then they'll stretch around and they do a lot of movement, and place themselves in various locations around the enclosure. Um, and the only thing I can think of is that they're incubating those eggs, and so they're they get it, bask a little bit and then they're, off the heat. And then they're over here where they're kind of halfway in between or, you know, um,
Have you ever temp gunned them to see like what their body temperature is, what they're keeping it at?
no, no, I've never really body temped them. I tempt the cage, and it has a gradient as it goes across. But no, I've never really temped their body.
And you keep that you maintain your standard temperatures for that when they're gravid. You keep the 90 and
As,
the
as soon as I know they're gravid, yeah. Because winter I tend to, have their heat off for longer, and the ambient room temperature is going to be cooler naturally. And so they're really only getting during the winter they're getting just a window of a hot spot. And then a lot of the time I won't even have it kick on at night. Um, and they're but as soon as I know that she refuses food or she gives me any sign or indication that she's gravid, yeah, I'm pulling them. I mean I pulled them from that schedule and they've got heat all um, at high heat during the day, the 90 degrees, and then back down to the ambient at night. But even at the ambient at night, the heat source will come on if it gets below 80. Um, and yeah, they
what are you
seem
using to provide heat for them? Is it like a heat panel or like a radiant heat panel or
it depends on the enclosure, but in the bigger cages where they're like glass fronted enclosures, I'm using the like a ceramic heat emitter that's like a bulb, but
Mhm.
it's a ceramic heat emitter, in a bulb fixture. And then if they're in racks. It's a heat tape, the Zoom Ed heat tape or whatever underneath the boa tubs. Um, they're I've produced Argentines in both of those setups with similar experience. I mean, the big key that I've ever seen is just that, how high they can go in the room, because I have much more success when they're the bottom, two cages. By the time they get to the third cage, I think the ambient of the room just starts to climb too high, that they're not. I've literally had where, the bottom Argentines are breeding, and then two cages above them, they're not breeding.
Wow.
And then I move them to, I flip flop them and move them to a lower enclosure, and then they start breeding. I mean, so they're, I think temp has a lot to do with it, and I think lighting has a lot to do with it too. I mean, they're not going to get as much, standard kind of daylight as during the winter. It's cooler. There's records of like snow on the ground sometimes in the winter where they come from. So
It's
I mean,
wild.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean,
that they're one of the snakes that I really want to see in the wild. I'd love to go out and herp Argentine boas. That would be so cool.
oh yeah, if you don't get killed, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's not. There's definitely parts of Argentina that are very dangerous. I would love to go see them in the wild. I'm fascinated by. I started a long time ago a Facebook group for Argentines, and there's the rare occasion somebody will come across a wild photograph of somebody in the area that'll get a picture of one, and fascinating every time I see it. There was one not too long ago that this thing was up this busted up tree. I mean, the tree didn't have any leaves on it. It was just like, it barely looked like it was alive, if even that. And at the very tippy top on this one little branch, there's this fairly large Argentine boa hanging off the tree like a green tree python, and it's got like an eagle in its,
Holy shit.
and I'm like, wow, that's freaking crazy. I mean, you think of Argentines as, these big, massive boa constrictors, and now they've got to be on the ground most of the time. Like, nope. Like, I mean, this thing's up in this tiny little tree, and it's killing an eagle. Like, and you're like, man, like, I think one of the most fascinating thing I've encountered in seeing wild pictures is that we have these black Argentine boas that in captivity, the few that it came in, legally, and have been reproduced for the last 20 some odd years, are all these fairly black animals with the white or gold markings. And in the wild, they range in background color quite a bit. And I've seen silver ones with black markings. And to me, that's, super fascinating. I mean, that, they're not necessarily the super dark black snakes that we, think of in the hobby. There are lighter versions of them. And obviously some of that has to do with age. They're born kind of gunmetal gray, and they get darker as they get older. But yeah, I've seen fairly large ones that were very much silver and black, not black or chocolate looking at all. So yeah, they're incredible. I would love to see some in the wild. In fact, I don't know if it was Vin's book or not, But I saw another wild picture of one eating some sort of predator. It wasn't like a fox. It was like I want to say it was like a weasel type. Um, but um, that was crazy to see that it had, grabbed a hold of this, weasel type, whatever it was. Um, but I think in a perfect world, guinea pigs would be what I would feed them on
Mm,
a regular basis. If I had um, I like feeding them guinea pigs over rabbits or even rats because that's 100% a natural food source. They eat guinea pigs in the wild. So I mean,
and eagles. Put eagles on that
and
list too.
eagles, yeah, yeah. If I get any eagles just lying around, I might,
Going to the Argentines.
yeah, I might feed an Argentine. They,
We'll
uh,
have to book a herping adventure to
oh
Argentina. That
yeah,
would be fun.
yeah. I'm jealous. My daughter's actually going herping in Costa Rica pretty soon. I'm super jealous. I'm still trying to find the time to go with her. Um, she's not going herping specifically. I mean, she's going with the school function, but she's going to be walking through the jungle at some point. And man, I'm itching.
Nice.
I would love to go. I'd love to go there. I'd love to go to Australia. That's on my bucket list to visit and herp.
Have you done any herping outside the country?
No,
I
no.
want to so bad.
I would love to. I love going herping. That's one thing that I loved moving to Tennessee was that um, I went herping a lot in California and wouldn't find much sometimes, or maybe find anything at all sometimes. And here in Tennessee, there's so much more water. There seems to be a higher, abundance of animal life here. And I mean, I every time I go out, I catch so many different snakes or frogs or you name it.
Hmm.
And it's so much fun. I mean, um, I'm like a kid in the candy store every time. I'm chasing the breaking, cutting my arms on bushes and almost breaking my neck on jumping through rivers and streams and stuff to get to these things. And I'm like, look how cool this is. And my wife's like, it's another Nerodia. You caught 10 of those in the last hour. And I'm like, yeah, but look how cool this one is. Like,
Yeah. You
so
do you guys have a lot of like salamanders and newts where you're at?
I haven't caught many of those. I've got a couple different types of salamander and newts. We've caught where we tend to go, there's a ton of Nerodia, the type of water snake. There's actually I found two different like subspecies of water snake, speckled kings, black racers, black rat snakes.
Nice.
Um, I've actually caught a, uh, oh man, what is it called? Um, a, oh, I'm going to screw up the name. Decanter's brown snake or, oh man, I can't think of the name. It's a tiny little snake.
Yeah.
I could swear it was a Decanter's brown snake. But we've caught one of those. Yeah, there's all kinds of cool stuff. I mean,
That's
um,
awesome.
I'm itching to find corn snakes because I breed corn snakes, and so finding a wild corn snake would be just over the moon for me. Um,
Come on down
and
here to Florida.
yeah, I would love to catch corns. Corn snakes are something that's been a staple. At least I've had one or two in my collection since I started, and um, that's something abnormal for me to catch something that I keep.
Hmm.
Most of the stuff I keep or am interested in, or Australia, South America, Indonesia, I mean, so to find something like that would be super cool. I mean, I've caught a lot of king snakes, but I didn't keep king snakes as long as I have corn snakes. King snakes were just a quick little adventure for me, and I'm not a big fan of king snakes, so I didn't.
Yeah.
That didn't. Those projects didn't last, but
Imagine seeing like a big boa constrictor just out in the wild. That would be so wild.
oh yeah, I
I'd
mean,
love that.
finding a wild, any species of the boa constrictor, I mean, would be just, I mean, that would put me over the moon. I mean, um, you know, it's, I mean, with how much fun I get from finding stuff that I catch all the time locally. Um, I can't even imagine finding something like that. That I've been in love with for all these years. And yeah, I mean, carpet pythons would just send me over the moon to catch a wild carpet python. I mean,
For sure. Or a bearded dragon, seeing those out in
right?
nature. That'd be so cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, something that you've been in love with for all this time. I mean, but I love animals of all sorts, and so finding stuff in the wild of anything. I mean, I love to go hiking and stuff, and just come upon random animals. And I was out herping a couple years ago in California. We found a badger. I thought that was the coolest shit ever. Like, I mean, there's this thing waddles across the road while we're slow cruising this backcountry road. I think it was me and my daughter. And this thing waddles across the road, and I'm all, what the hell was that? And then we get close, and we grab our flashlights, and it was a badger. And I was like, wow. Like, I mean, I've never seen a badger in person. I mean, other than in the zoos and stuff. But I thought that was the greatest shit ever. I mean, I'm like, a badger, like,
That's
you
so
know
cool. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I still like, we have a lot of bobcats where I'm at, and you see a bobcat, and it's you pause for a minute, and you're like, damn, that's a medium sized cat
yeah, that's a big
walking
kitty.
around. You
Yeah,
know, I saw
yeah.
otters too. I saw a mama otter and her babies, and I mean,
Oh, that's cool.
being in Florida, we have all the introduced reptiles, which is, it's bad for the environment. It's bad for the natural balance of everything. But it's cool if you're out herping and you can
Oh
be
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I mean, I've got a spot where there's a gammas, the ones with the vibrant
Wow.
orange head, and they mixed in with them. I was out. I took my kids out, and we were catching them with like these mesh fish traps, and
Right.
crickets. You'll get like a dozen in 20 minutes. It's ridiculous how fast they run in there, and then they can't get out. And all of a sudden, like, we're catching them and looking at them and everything, and they're so cool. And then all of a sudden we realize that there's a Mexican spiny tail iguana in there too. So it's like,
Wow. Yeah.
there's just so much introduced stuff here. It's out of control. And you go
Right.
down to Miami, and it's all the green iguanas and the berms and all that, just wreaking havoc on the environment.
Yeah. It's super unfortunate. We run into so much of that. I mean, you know, they're but still cool to see that stuff. I mean, it's a bummer to know that it's out there and you're seeing it, but then in the same breath to see it out in its natural setting doing what it naturally does is an incredible. I still geek out about the deer. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
my neighborhood is kind of on the outskirts of suburbia, and so we get like herds of deer that just like come walking through the streets of our neighborhood. And I still geek out about seeing deer. I mean,
Yeah.
it's awesome to see, something in its native habitat doing something, you know what I mean? Whether it's, you know, walking down a suburban street, eating the grass, from your neighbor's house, or, out in the forest, walking through. I mean, um, nature is a beautiful thing. And so, it doesn't matter in what way I can, be a part of it. I'll be a part of it, man.
Yeah, and the worst thing about the introduced species is that everybody demonizes the animal like it's the animal's fault that it's here.
Yeah.
Like the animal woke up one day and they were like, you know what, screw being in Burma. I'm going
Right.
to Florida and I'm just going to
Right.
tear it up, and
Yeah.
the animal didn't do that. They don't know what's going on. They're just surviving.
Yeah.
And then you look at humans and the things that we're doing to the environment, and we act as if, the Burmese python is doing the most damage to the state of Florida. But
Yeah.
go to a beach and look at
Yeah.
all the people dumping plastic everywhere.
Plastic and trash. And yeah, I mean, our sewage is flowing into the ocean. And yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, well, and then the sad part is that, I mean, all of that is all horrible, of course, but I mean, then on top of it, the reptile keeper, the passionate one about reptiles that, has never had an animal escape, um, acts, actively is trying to educate public and take care of your animals and do it all, above board and do all the right things. You're the one that, is demonized by, oh, you let these, snakes get loose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, we didn't. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody did. I mean, but even most of the stuff that, that's in Florida can be traced back to that one, you know, uh, event where, Hurricane Andrew came through and, sent a bunch of these things out into the Everglades. Now, are all of them from that? No, I'm sure there isn't. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff in there that people have just, opened their back door and let out. I mean,
for sure.
I caught a bearded dragon in California. I mean,
really?
Yeah. My kids were out playing near my house, and it was kind of a natural, grassy area, and heard the bushes rustle. My daughter went and confirmed that it wasn't a rattlesnake, and she called me up and she's like, "You're never gonna guess what I've got in my hands right now." And I'm like, "Did you catch this? Did you catch that?" I'm like running through all the kind of typical snakes and lizards and different things that we catch in that area. And she's like, "No, it's an adult bearded dragon." I'm like, and if you had it in a proper enclosure, how the hell did that thing escape? I mean,
they let it go.
Yeah, somebody let it go.
Yeah.
I mean, that it didn't break out of its enclosure. I mean,
that's my love-hate relationship I have with reptile shows, is that you walk through and you see a ton of people that just want something with scales.
Yep.
And they don't necessarily care what it is.
Yep.
I mean, the last show I went to, there was a guy walking around with an emerald tree boa, or I think it was, wrapped around his neck.
Yeah.
Just a like, just walking around and holding on to its tail and just walking around with this animal, just like the animal is just dazed, and confused, had no idea what was going on. And it's like, how successful is that going to be? Because if that guy cared about the animal, he'd be trying to reduce the stress as much as possible, so that way it can transition into being in a captive environment at his house and start feeding and all that. And he's treating it like it's a Pomeranian, in a bag, and that's my biggest thing about the shows is like, I love going there. I love getting supplies at a discount. I love seeing cool stuff and reputable breeders and everything. But then you see the other half, and it's like, yeah, these are the people that are gonna, if anybody's gonna let something go, it's the person that's there doing an impulse buy,
Yeah. Well, and that's something you'll see with, you'll get people that walk up to my booth and they're like, what's the cheapest snake on the table? I've got
Mm,
$10 or I've got $100, and it's like I just tell people to walk away. I mean,
yeah.
I don't got anything for sale right now. I mean, um, that's one benefit that I have over, some folks is a lot of the species I work with are a little more advanced. I tend to make people run away from my booth right before people are drawn into my booth. I mean,
Good.
yeah, it's, well, people walk up and they'll see a long-tail boa and they're like, oh, that's a really expensive, boa constrictor, like $400 or $500. That's, because as a baby, a long-tail boa kind of looks like a red-tailed boa. I mean,
Hmm.
and people see a $500 price tag and they're like, oh my god, like, why are you, this guy's crazy. He thinks he can, get that for, and they don't know that it's a long-tailed boa. And I mean, it's got lineage back to, the original founding animals, and before the species was, discovered to science. I mean, but I have that benefit that, a lot of folks, will come through and they'll see carpet pythons or blood pythons and they go, oh yeah, that's too advanced for me. Like I'm looking for something else. And so I can kind of deflect some of that, you know, uh, where you find the most of that anyway, of, the person that just wants some cheap pet, and they're not going to really do the research and stuff like that. But that being said, I still turn sales away. And that's the one benefit I have at shows that I don't have, online as much, is that online it's harder to have that conversation. I tend to make people call me and have a conversation over the phone, and me to get an idea of, whether what you're talking about or not. I mean,
Hmm.
um, and I do that at shows too. If you don't, if you don't sell your passion to me, I'm not going to sell you an animal. And it's unfortunate that we have to be like that, but sometimes we do. I mean, and that's not to say that there aren't still, people in the hobby that'll do, things that they shouldn't or whatever. But yeah, it's frustrating to see sometimes you get people that, you know, um, yeah, like you said, they're walking around and they've got some poor animal that they've drug all over the place, and
Hmm.
it doesn't want to be there. And when I bring animals to a show for a presentation or something like that, I'm rotating out of those animals so that they don't go to every birthday party and classroom education, and they're, there's, I'm limiting their, maybe I have this animal out for a little while and people are petting it and checking it out, and then, but then I'm putting that animal away and I'm getting something else out, and rotating them in and out so that they're not just sitting out on at a show all day long. I mean, you gotta do different things to, limit their stress,
Hmm.
and not, and you got to be able to read the animal. If it's starting to have, stress out, okay, put that away. Maybe he doesn't come out the rest of the show. I mean, you got to do stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that you got people that, they read one care sheet and they're, um, they walk around and they think they're some sort of expert or something. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you do a lot of educational stuff?
I haven't in Tennessee, but I have a lot over the years. I started doing reptile shows, at birthday parties, classroom education stuff, with the reptile zoo that I worked at.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and that's carried on fairly, quite a bit throughout, um, my years with reptiles. I've probably done anywhere between 5 and, 25 shows a year, for
Nice.
various levels of education. Lots of Boy Scouts and birthday parties and classroom stuff. And I used to do it for the kids' schools every year for free, both my kids. and I haven't done it this year. Haven't done it actually since we moved to Tennessee. I've put out our name out there. We've had a couple people make plans with us and then back out of plans, but I've been so busy doing my security job that I haven't had the time to do a lot of reptile education stuff. I mean, a lot of my stuff is more geared towards breeding now as well, and so I find it harder to have a lot of stuff that's super comfortable with moving, that taking with a bunch of kids that don't know what they're, doing. I mean,
Yeah.
Those animals have dwindled a little bit, at least in animals that I could trust without a question, that I could hand to some, kid that doesn't know what they're talking about or know what they're doing, so to speak, and, be comfortable that this thing's not going to hurt them. I mean, my kids know what to do with stuff like that. And, some of those kids that you run into at educational programs don't. And so that's a little more difficult. But yeah, it's more just that I haven't had a whole lot of time. I mean,
Yeah, I guess you have to have sort of animals set aside to be ambassadors and
a little bit. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, you can't. I have animals, let's say, I want to breed like a female. I mean, I can't afford to take her to an educational program and potentially stress her out and change her, cycling. I need her to ovulate when she needs to ovulate. So I
Yeah.
don't. So you got a lot of stuff that, is kind of off limits from being used like that. And then and even with males, I mean, sometimes, during the breeding season, I have a hard time, finding a lot of stuff that I can go take to an educational program, because you have to have enough animals to make it work. I could pull one snake out and talk about it for 2 hours, but you're not going to keep the attention span of 30 kids for 2 hours on one snake. So you have to have, every few minutes, you got to be able to rotate, and pull out the next thing. And so you have to have a fair amount of, animals that can, to pull those types of things off. But I love doing them. I definitely will continue to do them. And the longer we're here in Tennessee, I'm sure the longer we're gonna have, to do those shows and stuff like that. I was fairly popular in the area that I lived. People knew who I was because I'd been there for a while.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like a lot of like word of mouth, right? And
yeah. And until I do more shows locally and I get, more and more people aware that we're, local, I'm sure that stuff will increase. So.
yeah, it's something I'm interested in because I'd like to do it for my kids in their school because I think that their teachers always know that we have snakes and
Right.
their classmates and all that, so it'd be fun to
It's a
bring
ton
in.
of fun.
Yeah,
It's a ton of fun. We did most of my kids until my kids got into high school, and middle school. I've done it a little bit less. It's just harder to, coordinate it all. And some of the teachers aren't interested in doing it, so that doesn't help either. Only the science teacher is interested, or maybe this year the science teacher isn't interested. Um, and But it's a ton of fun. It's incredible I usually have, my kid help, do the presentation, and it's so much fun to see them kind of interact with their fellow, peers, and be telling, people about reptiles. And of course, everyone's got a million questions, and I make them answer, those questions. And the looks on these kids' faces that they're like, how many snakes do you have? And they're like,
Yeah.
like, 300 or what? Like, it's a blast. I mean, but yeah, education is a ton of fun. You'd be fascinated with how many interesting questions, thought-provoking questions that you'll get from kids that have never, thought about a reptile a day in their life, and they'll stump you and go, "Wow, that's an incredible question." I mean,
My
so
kids do that. I mean, we'll be driving somewhere and they'll be like, if a legless lizard doesn't have legs, why isn't it just a snake? And I'm
right.
like, crap, I better look this up now, because I don't know the answer, you know?
Because they have a lot of features that make them lizards and not a lot of
Yep.
features that make them snakes.
Yeah, yeah, we looked it up then, and that's what's so cool is they'll ask a question that I never would have thought
Yeah,
of because in my mind I'm just thinking there's a legless lizard and then there's a snake and they're different
right.
things, and
Yeah.
then you look it up and it's like, oh wow, okay, so the legless lizard their tail breaks off, they have ears, right?
They have
Snakes don't have
ears.
ears.
They have
Yeah.
they have eyelids. They can blink.
Yep.
They have fleshy tongues. They don't have a fork, as much of a fork in their tongue, so they use actually an olfactory gland to smell, and not a Jacobson's organ like with their
Mm.
tongue. They chew on food as opposed to swallowing it whole. Oh, man, their teeth are shaped differently. So yeah, it's
They're not they're not agile, that's for sure. We just pulled one
no,
out of our
they're
backyard
terrible.
and the kids were being very gentle and holding it and I was like, "Don't make him drop his tail cuz,
Right.
it's going to be
And they
most of
don't
his
they don't
body."
drop their tail as often as you would think. I mean, it's more detrimental, it seems, to them. But yeah, we had a native. Oh no, it wasn't a legless lizard. We had some big skinks, some alligator
Mm.
lizards, and some big skinks and stuff that we run into every once in a while. But um, yeah, they're fascinating animals. I mean, I've always liked them. The ones that were really popular when I was, getting into the hobby were the Russians or European legless lizards. Um, and I eventually got one, and he's cool. Uh, I don't hold him that much because he does tend to bite the crap out of me. But I mean, um, he just thinks everything's food. Like, you must be,
Oh, really? So it's not
yeah. I don't,
defensive, he's just trying to
no,
eat.
no, he's not scared of me. He just thinks that everything's food, and so he's gnawing on my finger, and I'm like, okay, that's not very nice. But yeah, and it doesn't matter how much I feed him. He just, I'll pick him up, and he just thinks that we're feeding him. But yeah, they're cool animals. They're utilized in Indiana Jones. The
Mhm.
the director in that scene, they couldn't get enough snakes to make the floor writhe, and so they went and picked out a bunch of legless lizards, and that's the majority of what you see is those and some reticulated pythons and some different king snakes and stuff. But yeah, they went down to Cal Zoo in California and wiped them out to film that
Really?
scene. Yeah, so they're pretty cool.
I think they used legless lizards in Empire Strikes Back too. In
They
the
might have.
when Luke goes down into the cave. Now I have to watch that again. I got to see.
There's a berm and an iguana and I think a tegu in Return of the Jedi. Um, there's at least one berm. There's an albino berm even, I think. There's a boa constrictor when they're in Dagobah, with Yoda.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's it. That's so funny though that you say that, because my kids have, it has ruined the imagination of some of my kids in some situations, because they see a snake in some of these movies, and it was never gonna be, I don't know, when my kids were younger, I was like, Santa and the Tooth Fairy and things like that. I'm not the guy that's gonna let that cat out of the bag. And so movies were kind of the same way. It's like, yeah, that's Iron Man, or that's Luke Skywalker, and it wasn't until the kids were older, but fairly young, my kids are like, that's a berm, and and I thought berms were from Burma. They're in Dagobah? Like, and then I'm like panicked. I'm like, let me think of what a good answer for this is. Um, and that's I thought that was the funniest thing, though, is that in multiple sci-fi type movies, things, or um, we watched Snakes on a Plane.
Oh God, no.
And the corn snake bites this guy and he dies of venom injection, and they're like, that's a corn snake, like that's not, that thing's harmless. So
Yeah, I mean, my kids get angry at Indiana Jones when he starts hurting snakes, because
yeah, yeah.
they're like, why would you even do that? You
Why
could
would
just
you
walk
do that?
away. Just
Yeah,
walk away
yeah.
from the animal. And they're so angry at Indiana Jones. And it's like, well, he's fictional, he's not really setting all
Right,
the snakes on fire,
right,
and
right.
but yeah,
But
it's funny how outraged they get.
yeah, or Holes was another one where they're the poisonous bearded dragons.
Oh yeah.
And my kids are both like, it's not poison, like, and that's a bearded dragon. So yeah,
Yeah, that's hilarious.
yeah. Reptiles, things with reptiles in the movies, they don't get past my kids, even when they were younger.
That's cool that they've taken a shining to it too, and that they're actually like interested in it because it's been such a big part of their upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been keeping and breeding snakes for all of their lives, and so they actually think it's weird that people don't have 100 snakes in their basement. I mean, and which is super funny to me. My daughter really likes reptiles. She's got both my kids have reptiles of their own. I mean, on a smaller scale, neither of them really want to be a breeder or anything like that. But my daughter has done almost every reptile show with me. She does all the educational stuff. She'll go to reptile shows and sell snakes with me.
Nice.
She actually does some really cool art, like T-shirt art. She takes bleach and she's an incredible artist, and she does like bleach art on like black T-shirts, and she's done dinosaurs and snakes and all kinds of cool things, and so she sells those at shows. And
I want to get one of those. That'd be
yeah,
cool.
yeah, they're super cool. I mean, I feel bad trying to buy them all up. She did this one. It was like jellyfish, dude. Like, it was so rad. I mean, I'm like, okay, I don't have enough money to buy all these damn T-shirts, and I mean, and she makes me pay full price. I don't know how my wife gets away with having all these damn things for free, but but she's charging me $25. I'm like, hey, wait a minute.
She knows that you got the snake cash.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, or she'll like bargain with me. She's like, oh well, I need this new cage for my snake. Like, how about I give you this? And I'm like, all right.
Hell yeah, good for her.
Yeah, she has fun with it. She does a bunch of different art stuff like that. But
where does
yeah,
she sell at, on Facebook or Instagram, or does she have a website?
pretty much just at the shows. She every time we go do a show, we do. She'll go to buy a bunch of bulk T-shirts, and she'll just go to town for a couple, I don't know, week or two, and do a bunch of different designs. And we take them to the shows. We try and keep most options as far as sizes, and yeah, it's pretty much all just on the spot, at shows. She'll change up her designs and stuff. So it's all custom. I mean,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's cool. But I have wanted to have her do some, stuff, and we can start shipping them out. You know what I mean? But we just haven't gotten there yet.
Well, you're
But
gonna have to hook me up. I want to see.
yeah,
I want to get some snakes or something. That would be
yeah,
awesome.
I'll show you some of the different designs and see if we can't send you one. I mean,
Hell yeah.
they're cool. She has a lot of fun with it, but she's definitely more into it than my son or even my wife are. I mean, they like reptiles, and they even have some of their own. But they're definitely not as super into it as she is. She's a nerd like I am. So
Cool. That's awesome. All you need is one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. My son's got his own things that he nerds out about. And we have our own things that me and him always want to talk about, or do things together that my daughter isn't into. So I mean, but it's super cool to. All of them are all very supportive of the reptiles. I mean, all of them have gone in there and cleaned cages and helped me out all the time. And
Nice.
my wife's one of her biggest contributions is she's the person that is like my voice of reason. I'm obsessed with something because I think they're super cool and this or that or whatever, and she's the kind of outside perspective of like, hey, is this really worth going down this rabbit hole? And and so she's sometimes my voice of reason, but then sometimes she gets me in trouble because she thinks that, oh, you got to have this, and then then I have a whole new problem of all kinds of crap I don't need. But
I know I'm lucky too. My wife is very supportive. So once I start, I'm like, yeah, I want to breed jungle carpet pythons, and she's right there, like, yeah, that one's cool. That one's neat. Yeah, get that one.
yeah. Well, yeah, because it starts out, with you got a couple pet snakes at home, and then, slowly you're like, man, it would be really cool if I had this whole section of my room that would be reptiles, and then you need a whole reptile room one day, and then you need multiple reptile rooms. I mean, and now it's like, we can't buy a house that doesn't have at least 2 reptile rooms, or we're in trouble. So, to be supportive of that is super great. I mean, and then I have a terrible sense of smell, so she's super helpful when we get something that like regurges or doesn't eat their rat, and I somehow missed it. She lets me know.
She's your detector.
Yeah, she walks in the house and she's like, something regurged or something died. I mean, what's that smell?
That's funny.
Yeah, she'll sniff it out. And my reptiles are like downstairs in their own separate room. I mean, or separate rooms. I mean, I don't have anything in the house, which I guess to some degree would seem rather depressing. You'd think somebody obsessed with reptiles would have them all over the place, but it's so much easier to try and clean and stuff when they're in one general location. I had them all over the house at one point, and it's a lot of work.
It's a nightmare.
You're trying to drag, cleaning products and bedding and all kinds of stuff all over the place, and it's a mess. I mean, and then there's nothing worse. Like there was a period of time where all the reptiles were in my bedroom. And it's like there's nothing worse than you just lay down from a long day, and then somebody takes a huge dump, 5 feet from your bed, and you're like, man, I've got to either get up and clean that, or you're gonna smell that all night long.
Yeah.
And it's like, Well, yep, that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I got out of the hobby when my wife got pregnant with our second kid because we had to allocate all the space to humans,
Right.
and I got out of it, and then we got this house, and it had an office, and I thought I was done with snakes, and then the kids were like, "I want a ball python," and I'm like, "Yeah, you know what? One pet snake wouldn't be a bad idea, And we got
Yeah.
that, and oh my god, it was 11 days after getting her that I'm like, and one boa constrictor, and then and it just kept going and going and going, and
Yeah, it snowballs, so, man.
yeah, and now the office is all cages on every single wall almost,
And pretty
and
soon you won't have room for the desk. That's got to go. I
I
mean,
know, I know, I know. I work from home a little bit, so I need the desk.
need the desk. Yeah. Yeah, you'll it's just the way it is. Things will
Yeah.
snowball, and I mean, uh
Oh yeah, we turned the dining room into it's going to be an auxiliary snake area too. So
nice.
yeah, we're expanding.
Well, and the benefit of what you got going on with, the big display enclosures and stuff is it's a piece of art. It's a piece of living art. I mean, and so that's much easier to have in other locations or auxiliary locations. You could have a second pair of feeding tongs over there and another
Hmm.
set of another hook or something. The various things that you need, you can have some of that, and it's not an eyesore.
Yeah.
A lot of my cages are very simple and very basic, to make sure that the husbandry is good for the animal, but not as great as a visual thing. And so my reptile room, when you walk in, it is not that cool looking. I mean, it's a room full of racks and a couple cages, but um, and so to put them in auxiliary locations is would require a display cage where it's going to look nice, um, and we'll probably get there at some point. The big thing that kept us away from that was grandma wouldn't come over and visit the
Hmm.
kids if there was snakes everywhere. So
Yeah.
um, that's kind of kept them at bay, so to speak, in the one or two rooms, because um, yeah, which was funny because even when I was renting a house, my landlord didn't know that I had hundreds of snakes. They would come in, and unless they had to go in that room, they would have never known.
Wow.
The Well, when I got it, when I was doing apartments and stuff, I was telling everybody, yeah, I've got three pet snakes or something like that, and I mean, eventually got to a point where I felt uncomfortable that I was gonna look like some sort of hoarder, and
You are a hoarder.
yeah, I mean, and,
You
and I
don't want to
had
look like one.
well, I don't want to look like a hoarder. I don't want to sound like a hoarder. And the other thing was that out of every other opportunity, when I've explained, yeah, there, I have a couple pet snakes or I have a pet lizard or something, people go, "Oh, it's in a cage? Oh, yeah, I don't care." Like they're looking for cats and dogs that are going to potentially damage the home, big
Hmm.
aquariums full of water. I mean, things that are going to potentially damage their property.
Yeah.
Um, and so, the pet guinea pig or the pet, reptile, like, yeah, no, we don't care. Like, and I had so many different renters, say that I eventually just stopped telling them.
Yeah.
Between that and how do you have it, convince somebody that, yeah, it's okay that I have 150 snakes. I mean, um,
It sounds so crazy. Yeah.
oh yeah, I've been blown away that I've never had the police knocking on my door going, "Hey, we had some report that there's 500 snakes in your house." Like,
Yeah.
well, they would be accurate.
Yeah. I totally get what you're saying, having them like I had them in 3 different places in the house, and that was too much. Once I went down to 2 spots, it got so much easier, just changing waters,
Yeah.
feeding, everything, cleaning, all that. It's so easy to forget about something
Yeah.
or leave it out of the rotation or something like that if you got too many spots to go to.
Yeah. You have too many things. You have to make things as easy as possible. I mean, I used to keep, all my reptiles would have like, like a ceramic or, some sort of ceramic water dish.
Hmm.
And, usually something big enough for them to, get into, preferably. Um, and you'd have sterilizing that many of those types of things is, I mean, just absolutely almost impossible.
Yeah.
Um, you're washing, with how many snakes that decide that, hey, it's a great idea to go to the bathroom in my water dish.
Hmm.
Um, it was such a mess to try and clean that on a regular basis. Hundreds of dishes. You would need your own dishwasher, solely for the reptile water dishes. I mean,
Yeah.
and I was like, man, uh, I hate to, not recycle things and stuff, but I use water. My water dishes are all deli cups.
Yeah.
They've got, uh, it's changes depending on the size enclosure that they're in and how much water that species is, you know, needing on a regular basis. But and I try and use them as long as possible, as long as it's not a health risk for the animal. But I mean, when that thing gets soiled, I can throw it in the trash, or I can take it in, throw it in the recycler,
Yeah.
um, and move forward. Same with bedding. I mean, I use lots of particulate bedding and not paper, that I'm just throwing away. And at particulate bedding, I could go take out into the garden and dump cypress mulch with snake poo in it,
Oh, heck yeah.
and you know throw it in the mulch, and yeah, you have to do things differently when you have a lot of animals. I mean, it's not as easy to just do things the way that you've always done them. I mean, you know, I used to buy Provenamite,
Yeah.
um, because I wanted to make sure that my animals didn't get any type of infestation of parasites and stuff like that. And then you get to a point where you're like, $30 a can of this stuff. I mean, for me to
Hmm.
keep up with spraying this many enclosures on a regular basis to prevent these nasty things from ever rearing their ugly head in my collection, you go through a lot of that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
and then you find out that, oh, well, you could go into Walmart or Walgreens or Target or any place that sells any type of lice removal for your kids. And oh, fun fact, it's the exact same stuff. It's
Mm.
100% permethrin in an aerosol form, and the can's like $5, like maybe 350 in certain places, and it's like, well, yeah, we're not going to be buying Provenamide anymore.
Yeah, that's a good hack right there. I remember I used to use Nix.
Nix, yeah, Nix
Yeah,
makes them.
that
Yeah,
yeah, that was I remember using that and yeah, it worked.
yeah, it's the same stuff. It's an aerosol. It's aerosol permethrin,
Yeah.
100% aerosol permethrin. You know, you learn various tricks like that over the years. There's unfortunately, the stuff that has a pet snake on the picture, is marketed for you,
Yeah.
and so then there's an upcharge for that. Um,
The snake tax.
yeah, and I get it. I mean, that's no different than a lot of different things. You could go into every hobby, I'm sure, and find various things that you could find at better deals for um, but because it's marketed for you, it's, more expensive. I mean, um, but you reach a point where you can't use that. I mean, if I went and spent $24, I think the last time I went into like a pet store, a bag of 24 dry quarts of Aspen, cost me like $25.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like, I would go through, I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars in just 1 week or two. I mean, you can't, that's not sustainable.
No.
I mean, yeah, that's too crazy. I can spend a lot of money on caging. Most of the most of the cages, are gonna probably last you forever if you buy a decent enclosure. Um, I mean, I still have vision cages of when I first bought them, 15, 20 years ago. So, um, uh, some of that stuff is worth the money that you
Yeah.
spend. But I could tell you a ton of glass enclosures or wooden enclosures that I spent a lot of money on and aren't still around because they fell apart. I mean, um, so there's some stuff that's worth the money and there's some stuff that isn't. But yeah, you got to be able to find some hacks and things like that. You can't always buy the pet store stuff. In
Yeah,
fact,
those front opening glass cages, the plastic warps, it chips, it cracks, the screen starts sagging, and yeah, it's
in some of them for sure, yeah. I mean, um, I don't. I've only used vision cages for a fair amount of time now. I got a couple. I used to live in California, obviously, and so that's where Vision started was in that area, and so I've got some of those cages that are still around today that have survived all these years of, after I've thrown away glass and wooden enclosures, time and time again, and I'm like, okay, well, this is what's holding up, and so that's what I'm going to spend my money on.
mhm.
And so I've only used them for a long while now. But yeah, some of that stuff is not worth the money, and I mean you have to be able to find various hacks and things, and because yeah, it's too expensive to do anything else. I mean, um, I the only reason I don't breed my own rodents, because that's a huge hack if you can do it, is I'm I don't have the space to breed rodents. I'm using all of that for snakes. And then even if I had the space, I can't do it. I'm too allergic to it. When I was first getting into the reptile hobby, we had at the reptile shop, we would sell rodents, live rodents. Um, and I was the new guy. And so I'd have to clean, the rat rack. And um, I would be just a mess.
Mm.
My eyes are watering. My nose was, running. I couldn't breathe. My throat's closing up. Just after a couple cages. By the time I finished a rack, I was ready to, call an, ambulance. I mean, um, and so I've done that a little bit on a small scale just to have some live, fuzzies and pinkies to feed some of the stuff. But other than that, no, I like my rats frozen.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, if you're allergic to them, it's just not worth it.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, it's nasty. So
All right, man. I think dang, we're coming up on 3.5 hours.
yeah,
Well
and if you don't cut off the recording, I'll just keep talking. It's
what's your favorite snake? Doesn't have to be something you can own. It could be anything. As long as it's
anything
existing right now, it can't be extinct.
can't be extinct. Man, um, I don't know. Um, that's a crazy question. I've got, well, it's because I like so many different things. It's hard to just peg it down to one. Um,
Yeah,
I
especially for you. You got so many different species and everything. You love everything.
yeah, well, like I remember on one of the podcasts I did, somebody asked me, or it was the guys from Morelia Python Radio that they asked me, what's like the one reptile that you can't keep that you would love to or whatever. And I said the perennial monitor, from Australia. I think that would just be the coolest thing ever. But all the snakes, it's like I pretty much can keep those. I mean, um, besides maybe like the Owen Pelly python, or maybe there's a rare carpet python or so that I can't get my hands on, or at least
Yeah.
can't right now. Um, yeah, I'd I'd probably say if I had to just my favorite species has got to be it's got to be probably Argentine boas. I mean,
Nice.
if I absolutely have to, shotgun to the head type of deal, what's my favorite? That's probably what I would say. I mean,
Cool.
they're so interesting. That's what I geek out about. At the end of the day, I could care less about mutations and stuff. Every species that I keep, all the morphs could go away tomorrow, and I would still keep all the same species. I might not have as many of them, but um, it really wouldn't dwindle my numbers much. I like bull snakes, because of what they are and where they come from and how they survive in the wild. Um, and the localities that they come from and how different those various localities are. And the same goes for my carpet pythons, all the different subspecies of and localities of carpets that I work with, or Argentine boa, or I mean, not Argentines, but the boa constrictor, clade that I work with. Like, um, that's what's fascinating to me, and where they come from, and how unique that this boa from this area, lives like this, or does this, or looks like this, and why is that different? And um, you know, that's what I geek out about, and I could care less about that it comes in some glow in the dark color. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a bonus, color that my favorite snake comes in. That's not, why I like it. Um, so yeah, but that's why I have all kinds of different stuff, because I mean, I like it all. I
Yeah.
mean, if I had endless supplies of money and space, I would have probably a little bit of everything. I mean,
Yeah.
even more so. So
Yeah, I have a couple boa morphs. I have an orange gasm and an IMG, and the IMG
oh,
is
I
just
love the
so
IMG.
cool. It's so cool. I love it. It's my
Love the
favorite morph.
IMG. Yeah,
And he's a motley IMG, so he just keeps getting darker and
but
darker,
darker. Yeah,
and yeah, his eyes are like black orbs, and even when he goes into shed, he looks like a I don't know, like a Resident Evil zombie. He's just so neat looking. And yeah, it's so, but at the same time, then I get the Argentine boa, and man, she's, like you said, the looking into the natural history of the animal and wanting to know more about how they live in the wild and everything is that's become so much fun too, with the
yeah.
localities and all that.
That's my favorite thing about all of that. But I am going to say, since you mentioned IMG boas, if I ever went down that path, uh, I would want. Uh, I'm going to butcher his name, so now I'm not going to think of it entirely. But there's a guy I've chatted with a couple times that he produces. Um, a Costa Rican cross of an IMG, and so he's made these IMGs that are fairly small because they've got a lot of Costa Rican blood in them, and then they look fairly different because of the Costa Rican influence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know that that's a morph and a cross. And I mean, I would just jump in full fledged reckless abandon because how cool those things look. And they're small. I mean, you could easily keep them like you would a ball python. And I'm like, man, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
So if I ever go down the rabbit hole of boas, morph boas, that's what I'm going after.
I
That
wonder what
IMG
an
is
IMG
incredible.
Argentine would look like.
Oh man,
There'd be so much black.
yeah, it would just be black probably. You'd
But
probably black them out. Yeah, um, yeah, you'd probably black out, I would imagine. But who knows? Yeah, I mean, I've seen interesting, crosses of things that you would never. Um, Unfortunately, when you do crosses with Argentines, you usually just get kind of a mixed bag, and it usually somewhere weirdly in between an Argentine or a Colombian boa or imperator.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then if you get like another generation in, they just look like Argentines, but they're just kind of funny looking Argentines. Um,
Do you think that's a big problem is trying to find Argentines that are actually pure?
yeah, because there's not many of them out of there.
Mm,
Um, I mean, um, they're either not pure or you don't know that they're not pure. That's
mm-hmm.
the biggest thing with boa constrictor or carpet pythons is that you have so many um, different subspecies and localities, and you have so many people that have reproduced them without paying any attention to keeping those things pure or keeping any track of who produced them or anything like that. That yeah, you have a lot of boa constrictor and carpet pythons alike that have no lineage, and so after whoever produced that animal, um, you have no idea what's in there. And unfortunately, that sucks because I want to know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
um, to me, a diamond that isn't a real diamond, the cubic zirconia isn't really that impressive to me. Still pretty, but I want the real thing uh, because where it comes from and all of that matters to me. And for the same reason why a good majority of my reptiles all come from the same place. I mean, um, all my carpet pythons or all my boa constrictors, all the species that I work with, a good portion of them are from people that I know and respect and trust. Um, you know, the amount of animals that you could pick out that I got at a reptile show and I don't remember their name or a pet store is zero.
Mm-hmm.
None of my stuff is from anybody but an incredible reputable breeder that is either small time and I know really well, or somebody that's more well known. Um, but yeah, you don't know, and so unfortunately, like a good majority of my Argentine boas have no pedigree, they have no lineage, and because they're animals that are descendant of some of my first Argentines, and some of them are my first Argentines that I've had for 12, 15 years. I'm not going to get rid of them because I care deeply about them as an individual. But you know, I have Argentines that I'm raising because they have a pedigree, because they have that provenance. Um, and because that is important to me. And I have that with a lot of the species that I work with. Carpet pythons, all of anything that doesn't have provenance has been washed out.
Hmm.
Do not own a carpet python that doesn't have pedigree. I know where all of it came from and stuff like that. And to a lot of people that I sell animals to, could care less. They don't have any interest in where it came from um, or anything like that. But for the people that do care, I have that I have that opportunity for them, that I can show you parents, grandparents, great grandparents, some of these 4, 5, 6, plus generations of who produced them and what they looked like and where they came from. And to me, that, I have, to the best of my ability, this is a coastal carpet python. I mean, and not just because I think it looks like a coastal carpet python. I mean, it's because here's all the proof. I mean, you know, um,
Oh, I have a jungle from mutton, and man, the lineage on that thing is ridiculous.
it's awesome, right? I mean, even if you never breed that thing, it's just a cool thing to look at and be like, man, that's awesome. Then I can look at, her parents and grandparents, and
Yeah.
that's incredible. I mean,
Is that even a thing with Argentines? Like, is there like, does anybody have records like
not
that?
really. Not really. To some degree. I mean, like Vin Russo, for instance, has you pretty much can't buy any locality from him and it not be pure as pure as you're gonna get, basically.
Hmm.
Because he has to have that kind of provenance and he has to kind of know where this stuff came from and stuff. But he doesn't do the like breakdown. He just he kind of it's more of a, you have to take his word for it, but his word's good for it.
Hmm.
Um, and on some stuff he has, like I have the crawl K boas, for instance, from him that I have, the paperwork from the original, like animals that were imported legally from Bob Sears. Um, and so those animals link back to those animals that were imported by him. Um, Sorry, I said Bob Sears. It's Scott Boback, Dr. Scott Boback. But yeah, like, I mean, some of that has, that sort of thing. The Argentines, like I have a pair of Argentines from Vin that they they can be traced back to the animals that were produced by. Oh man, my brain's not working. But they can be traced back to animals that like Eugene Bissett brought into the country, and then
Wow.
changed hands to like Rio Bravo reptiles and stuff. Um, it's his name that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but yeah, those those animals are as pure as you're gonna get. I mean, um, you can't find anything that necessarily has a pedigree with them.
Yeah.
But and don't get me wrong, I've looked at enough Argentines that I could fare with with fair certainty that I could tell you that the unlineaged Argentines that I work with are, to the best of my opinion, probably pure, but without any guarantee, because you can breed some of that stuff together, or you get a couple generations away from the cross, and then of course the animals are going to potentially look a little bit more like mom or a little bit more like dad.
Yeah.
And then if you take those two crosses and breed them together, yeah, God knows what you're going to produce. I mean, I'm sure phenotype is not as specific to the the subspecies as we think it is. You're gonna you're going to get somewhere in between, or sometimes you get something that looks exactly like, you know, you know, the cross, or exactly like the actual, you know, whatever species you're trying to do. I've seen it with diamond pythons a ton. You know, you could have a pure diamond and a cross, you know, side by side, and you know, you might not be able to tell the difference. I mean,
Yeah, it's scary.
yeah, and I do my best, but you know, I couldn't bring myself to sell those animals either, or sell the adults I have. Um, you know, you know, I still have a female that I produced. My first time I ever produced Argentine boas. You know, I still have an adult male and female from that, and I reproduce them on a, you know, fairly regular basis. And man, I can't get rid of those things. Like,
Yeah.
man, so, but yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, thanks, brother. I
Hey, no problem.
appreciate you coming on, and it was a good talk.
Yeah, we had a ton of fun, and I'm sure that, um, you know, we could talk a ton more.
Hell
So
yeah.
if,
Yeah, we'll make it happen again.
yeah, definitely. Um, we'll hone in on some other species or something, or we'll have fun.
Hell yeah. Thank you.
Anytime, just reach out to me.